I was used to my stepmother sighing and telling my father that I was lying again whenever I flinched in pain. But tonight, the doctor did not ask for her opinion. He snapped my x-ray onto the light box and read every fracture out loud, listing 3 separate breaks hidden over 5 years. For the first time, my bones were screaming the truth my voice could not, and her perfect mask finally cracked under the harsh hospital lights. My name is Mallory Pierce. I am 32 years old, and I am a lead radiology technician at the Blue Mesa Community Health Institute. It is a title that suggests authority, precision, and a steady hand. But as I sat in the driver's seat of my freezing sedan, my hands were trembling so violently that I could not even grip the steering wheel. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2 in the morning. I had just finished a double shift, covering for a colleague who had called out with the flu. 16 hours on my feet. 16 hours of wearing a lead apron that weighed enough to make my shoulders scream in protest. 16 hours of holding my breath while I positioned patients, telling them to inhale and hold, clicking the button, and then exhaling only when I knew the image was clear. I spent my life looking through people. I spent my days and nights staring at the grayscale truth of human anatomy, finding the cracks in bones, the fluid in lungs, the secrets that flesh tried to hide, but skeletons confessed. Yet, as I stared up at the yellow light spilling from the third-floor windows of the hospital, I realized the bitter irony of my existence. I could spot a hairline fracture on a stranger from across the room, but I had never allowed myself to be examined. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. The car smelled like stale coffee and the sharp, chemical tang of hospital disinfectant that seemed to seep out of my pores no matter how hard I scrubbed in the shower. My scrubs were sticky with dried sweat at the small of my back. My lower back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that radiated up into my ribcage, a sensation I had grown so accustomed to that it felt less like pain and more like a factory setting. It was just how I was built, or so I had been told for half my life. Outside, the Colorado winter was unforgiving. Thick, heavy flakes of snow were piling up on the hood of my car, muffling the world, turning the sprawling parking lot into a quiet, white graveyard of vehicles. I should have started the engine. I should have turned on the heater and begun the 20-minute drive back to my apartment to collapse into sleep. But I could not move. I felt paralyzed, not just by exhaustion, but by a profound sense of dread that waited for me the moment I left the sanctuary of my work. At the hospital, I was Mallory the tech. I was competent. I was necessary. Outside of these walls, I was just the daughter who made things up. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, the sound loud and jarring in the silence. The screen lit up, cutting through the darkness. I knew who it was before I even looked. It was never a friend asking if I wanted to grab a drink. It was never a romantic interest sending a late-night confession. It was always the group chat, the one titled simply, Family, Pierce and Dalton. The hyphen in the group name always felt like a canyon I was trying to bridge. Pierce was my father, Grant. Dalton was her, Victoria, my stepmother. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. The cold from the glass seeped into my skin. There were 3 new messages. The first was from Victoria. Mallory, darling, I know you are working late, but do not forget this weekend. We need you here by 8 in the morning on Saturday. The house needs a deep clean before the caterers arrive for the 10th anniversary party. I trust you to handle the crystal polishing. The cleaning service just does not have your touch. I read the text twice, feeling the air catch in my throat. Saturday. Saturday was my only day off this month. I had traded 3 shifts just to get 24 hours of rest because the pain in my side had been making it hard to breathe deeply. She knew that. I had told her that 2 days ago when she asked me to run errands for her. The text was classic Victoria. It was wrapped in a compliment, your touch. But it was an order. It was manual labor disguised as familial duty. She was celebrating 10 years of marriage to my father, a decade of her reign, and my role was to be the unpaid staff who polished the glasses they would toast with. The second message was from my father, Grant. Mal. Victoria mentioned that Patek Philippe watch she liked at the jeweler downtown. the one with the pearl face. It would mean a lot if you picked it up for her as your gift. Show her you appreciate everything she has done for us." My stomach turned. I squeezed my eyes shut, doing the mental math. That watch cost nearly $4,000. I knew because I had seen the brochure she conveniently left open on the kitchen counter last Sunday. $4,000. I was currently carrying $6,000 in credit card debt, almost all of it accumulated from family emergencies that somehow always fell on me to solve. Last month, it was the new transmission for my dad's truck, because he was short on cash until his bonus came in. The month before that, it was the deposit for the rental cabin for this very anniversary party, which Victoria insisted I put on my card to earn the travel points, promising she would write me a check. That check never came. I opened my banking app, just to confirm what I already knew. My checking account had $212 in it until payday next Friday. I typed a response, my fingers stiff. "Dad, I really can't afford the watch right now. I still haven't paid off the cabin deposit, and rent is due. Can we do something smaller?" I did not send it. I deleted it. I knew what would happen if I sent it. The guilt trip, the sighing, the lecture about how I needed to manage my finances better, about how I should be grateful Victoria treated me like her own daughter. Before I could decide what to say, the third message popped up. It was Victoria again, responding to a silence I hadn't even broken yet. She must have seen the typing bubble appear and disappear. "And please, Mallory, bring your happy face this time. I do not want a repeat of last month when you spent the whole dinner clutching your back and grimacing. It makes the guests uncomfortable. Dr. Henderson already told your father there was nothing wrong with your previous x-rays. Do not start playing the sick card again just to get out of helping. She is lying again. Grant, I told you she would try to get out of the cleaning. She is lying again." The words sat there on the screen, glowing white against the dark background. It was not just a sentence. It was a verdict. It was the caption to my entire adult life. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, as if it had burned me. My breath was coming in short. Shallow gasps now. The kind that made the ribs on my right side flare with a sharp, hot agony. I pressed my hand against my chest, digging my fingers into the thick fabric of my winter coat, trying to massage the pain away. "You're fine," I told myself. "It's just stress. It's just muscle spasms. You're sitting too much. You're weak." That was what they told me. That was what I repeated to myself like a mantra. I closed my eyes and the memory from 3 weeks ago washed over me, unbidden and visceral. I was at their house, the sprawling colonial estate in the suburbs that Victoria had insisted they buy a year after she married my father. I was carrying a heavy silver serving tray loaded with a roast turkey for a casual Sunday dinner she was hosting for her charity board. The tray must have weighed 20 pounds. I had been walking from the kitchen to the dining room. The floor was polished hardwood, slippery and gleaming. As I stepped down the single recessed step into the dining area, a jolt of electricity had shot through my thoracic spine. It was so intense my vision went black for a second. My knees buckled. I didn't drop the turkey. I was too conditioned for that. I absorbed the fall with my body, twisting so the tray landed safely on the sideboard while my rib cage slammed into the edge of the heavy oak table. I had collapsed onto the rug, gasping, unable to draw air into my lungs. Victoria had been there instantly. I remembered the sound of her heels clicking rapidly across the wood. She didn't kneel beside me. She checked the turkey. She straightened the silver fork on the platter. Then she looked down at me, her face arranged in a mask of mild annoyance. "Get up. Mallory," she had hissed, her voice low so the guests in the other room wouldn't hear. "You are making a scene." I can't breathe. I had wheezed, tears leaking out of my eyes. Something popped. It hurts. "Oh, stop it," she had said, reaching down and gripping my arm, pulling me up with surprising strength. "You barely bumped the table. You are always so dramatic. It is just a bruise. Go wash your face. You look manic." When I tried to tell my father later that night that I thought I needed to go to urgent care, Victoria had laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, like wind chimes. "Grant, listen to her," she had said. pouring him a glass of wine. Always the drama queen. Remember when she said she broke her ankle in high school and it was just a sprain? She just wants attention because you have been busy with work. It is psychosomatic. Honey, she is lying again. And my father? My dad, who used to carry me on his shoulders and call me his little warrior, looked at me with tired, disappointed eyes. "Tough it out, Mal," he had said. "Victoria says you're fine. Don't ruin the night." So I did. I toughed it out. I swallowed 4 ibuprofen and served the pie, smiling while every breath felt like a jagged piece of glass was turning inside my chest. Back in the car, the memory faded, leaving only the cold reality of the parking lot. I looked at my hands. They were technician's hands, clean, short nails, dry skin from constant washing. These hands had positioned accident victims who were screaming in pain. I listened to strangers. I believed strangers. When a patient told me it hurts here, I never rolled my eyes. I never told them they were lying. I adjusted the collimator. I changed the exposure settings. I found the proof. But when it came to my own body, I was not the technician. I was the daughter, and the daughter was a liar. I picked up the phone again. I did not reply to the text about the cleaning. I did not reply to the text about the watch. I simply typed, "I will be there on Saturday." I put the car in gear. My chest felt tight, restricted, as if I were wearing a corset made of iron. I told myself it was just the anxiety. I told myself it was the fatigue of the double shift. As I drove out of the lot, the snow was falling harder now, covering the windshield in a thick white blanket. The wipers swiped back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the storm. The world outside was being buried, layer by layer. Under a pristine, perfect white surface, it looked beautiful. It looked flawless. But I knew what lay beneath the snow. I knew there was black ice and hard asphalt and frozen dirt waiting under that perfect covering. Just like Victoria's perfect family dinners. Just like her perfect marriage to my father. And as I turned onto the highway, clutching my side, I had a terrifying thought that I pushed away as quickly as it came. What if I'm not lying? The thought was dangerous. It threatened the entire ecosystem of my family. If I wasn't lying, then they were cruel. If I wasn't lying, then the last 10 years of clumsiness and accidents were not jokes. I turned up the radio to drown out the thought. The pain in my ribs pulsed in time with the beat, a silent drum warning of a war that was about to begin, right there inside my own skin. I drove home in the dark, serving the people who hurt me, unaware that the evidence was already etched into my bones, waiting for someone to finally turn on the light. I sat in my car for a long time that night, long enough for the snow to completely cover the back window, turning the interior into a dark, airless capsule. The silence gave me too much room to think, and when I thought, I inevitably traveled backward. I went back to the time before my bones were a topic of debate, back to when I was just a daughter, not a defendant in a trial I never agreed to participate in. I was not always the liar. I used to be the mechanic. Before Victoria, it was just Dad and me. My mother died of ovarian cancer when I was 14, leaving behind a house full of half-finished craft projects and a silence that felt heavy enough to crush us both. But we survived it. We survived it with grease under our fingernails and pepperoni pizza on the beige sofa. My father, Grant Pierce, was a man who showed love by fixing things. He taught me that if something was broken, you took it apart, found the faulty gear, and replaced it. We spent my high school weekends restoring a 1978 Ford F-150 in the garage. I knew how to bleed brakes before I knew how to apply eyeliner. I knew the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench, and most importantly, I knew that when I told my dad the carburetor was flooding, he believed me. He would wipe his hands on a rag, lean over the engine block, and say, "Good catch, Mal. You have got a sharp eye." I was his partner. I was the person he trusted to hold the flashlight steady. Then came the fundraiser. I was 17, just months away from graduating high school, when he met her, Victoria Dalton. She did not walk into a room. She curated it. She was a public relations executive for a mid-sized firm in Denver, and she treated her entire existence like a brand launch. She was beautiful, in that sharp, polished way that makes you feel instantly underdressed. She had a laugh that sounded like champagne bubbling over, and she directed all of it at my father. He was lonely, I see that now. He was a man drowning in grief and transmission fluid, and she looked like a life raft made of silk and expensive perfume. She moved in 6 months later, just after I turned 18, and that was when the rewriting of Mallory Pierce began. It was subtle at first. It was not a sudden coup. It was a slow erosion of my territory. Victoria did not banish me from the house. She just gave me a new job description. Mallory, sweetie, she would say, breezing through the kitchen in a suit that cost more than my first car. I am swamped with the charity gala committee tonight. Would you mind handling dinner and the laundry? You are so much better at domestic things than I am. I am just hopeless without a team. It was flattery weaponized as labor, because I was 18 and desperate for her approval, desperate to see my dad happy. I did it. I cooked. I cleaned. I scrubbed the baseboards. Meanwhile, Victoria was out networking, which usually meant wine dinners with the local elite, cementing her status as the new matriarch of the Pierce family. By the time I started applying to colleges, the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the daughter. I was the staff, and staff does not get to make demands. I had dreams of going to the state university in Boulder. I wanted to study biology. I had the grades for it, and Mom and Dad had started a college fund years ago. It was not a fortune, about $40,000, but it was enough to get me started without drowning in loans. I remember the night that dream died. It was a Tuesday. I was washing dishes, always washing dishes, while Dad and Victoria sat at the kitchen island. "Honey," Victoria said, her voice low and reasonable, the voice of a financial advisor giving hard but necessary news. "I just do not think Boulder is the right fit for Mallory. She is a homebody. She gets overwhelmed so easily. Remember how stressed she was during finals?" I paused, a soapy plate in my hand. I had not been overwhelmed. I had a 4.0 GPA. "And financially," Victoria continued, placing a manicured hand over Dad's rough one, "the market is so volatile. If we use that money for the kitchen renovation and the sunroom extension, we add equity to the house. That is an investment for the whole family. Mallory is practical. She would be much happier at the community college. It is smaller, safer." I turned off the water. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking, "that money was for my degree. Mom saved that." Victoria turned to me, her face a picture of pity. "Oh, Mallory, do not bring your mother into this to manipulate your father. That is cruel. We are talking about logic, not emotion. You are not ready for a big university. We are just trying to protect you." I looked at my dad. I waited for him to say, "Good catch, Mal. You are right." I waited for him to be the guy who fixed things. Instead, he looked at the quartz sample Victoria had placed on the counter. "She makes a good point. Mal," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Community college is a smart start. We can use the equity later. Maybe." That was the first fracture. The money vanished into a chef's kitchen where Victoria reheated takeout, and I enrolled in the local tech program to become an X-ray technician because it was the fastest, cheapest route to a paycheck. But the theft of my future was nothing compared to the theft of my voice. Victoria was a master storyteller, and I became her favorite antagonist. At family gatherings, Thanksgiving, Christmas, the 4th of July barbecues, she would hold court with aunts and uncles I had known my whole life. She would sip her Pinot Grigio and say, "Oh, you know, Mallory, everything is a crisis." There was the time I caught a bad case of influenza the winter I was 20. I had a fever of 103. I was shivering so hard my teeth rattled. I stayed in my room for 3 days. Downstairs, I heard Victoria laughing with her friends. "She is hibernating," she told them. A little sniffle and she acts like she is on her deathbed. I swear, that girl loves the drama of being sick. It is her way of opting out of life. When I finally emerged, pale and 10 pounds lighter, my aunt looked at me with a skepticism that stung worse than the fever. feeling better. Sarah Bernhardt? She asked. Victoria said you were putting on quite a show. They laughed. Everyone laughed. It became the running gag of the Pierce Dalton household. Mallory the drama queen. Mallory the hypochondriac. Mallory the girl who cried wolf. It was effective because it was total. If I was upset about something Victoria said, I was being sensitive. If I was hurt physically, I was looking for attention. If I tried to correct a lie she told about me, I was remembering it wrong. She instituted a rule, unspoken but ironclad, the gatekeeper rule. Your father is under so much pressure at work, she would tell me, blocking the doorway to his study. Do not burden him with your little complaints. If you need to talk to him, run it by me first. We need to be a united front. We need to make sure your story is straight. My story is straight. I would argue, I just want to tell him you forgot to pay my tuition again. See? She would sigh, shaking her head, always trying to cause trouble. I paid it this morning. You are just trying to make me look bad. You are lying again. Mallory. And when I checked the account later, the payment would be there. Time-stamped 5 minutes after our conversation. She gaslit me so effectively that I started checking my own sanity. Did I forget? I would wonder, did I miss the notification? Maybe I am dramatic. Maybe I am the problem. That doubt is a poison. It seeps into your marrow. It makes you weak. The defining moment, the night I realized I was entirely alone, happened 4 years ago. It was the night before my certification exam for the American Registry of Radiologic Technologists. This was the test that would allow me to work, to move out, to escape. I had been studying for months. My flashcards were my lifeline. I came home from my clinical rotation at 6 p.m, ready to cram for the final few hours. Victoria was in the living room, surrounded by boxes of decorations. Mallory. Thank God you are here, she said, not looking up from her clipboard. The regional director of the Red Cross is coming for brunch tomorrow. The basement is a disaster. I need you to go down there and organize the storage shelves. We need to clear space to hide these boxes. Victoria, my board exam is tomorrow morning, I said, clutching my backpack straps. I need to sleep. I need to review. She dropped the clipboard. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. She looked at me with eyes that were cold and hard, like polished stones. We put a roof over your head, she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register. We sacrificed the renovation budget to help you with your little car repairs last month. And now, when I ask for 1 hour of help to maintain this family's reputation, you throw your exam in my face? It's not just an exam, I pleaded. It's my career. You are so selfish, she whispered, just like your mother, always thinking the world revolves around your pain, your stress, your needs. Grant is exhausted. Do you want me to tell him his daughter is too important to help him? She knew exactly where to slip the knife. She knew I would do anything to not disappoint my dad, even though he had long since stopped defending me. Fine, I said, 1 hour. It was not 1 hour. It took 4 hours. The basement was damp and cold. I hauled heavy plastic bins of winter coats and old tax records. I dragged a rusted treadmill into the corner. My back ached, a prelude to the chronic pain I would live with later, but I pushed through it. At midnight, I came upstairs, covered in dust, my hands shaking from fatigue. Victoria was sitting on the sofa, watching a talk show, eating a bowl of popcorn. All done? She asked, not looking away from the screen. Yes, I said, I'm going to bed. Make sure you vacuum the stairs on your way up, she said. You tracked dust everywhere. God, you are messy. I stood there, staring at the back of her perfectly highlighted hair. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the vacuum through the television screen, but I didn't. I was 22 years old, but I felt like a child who had been sent to the corner. I vacuumed the stairs. The next morning, I took my exam on 4 hours of sleep and a breakfast of ibuprofen. I passed, but just barely. When I told them I passed, Dad smiled and said, "Good job, kiddo." But Victoria? She laughed. I told you there was nothing to worry about, she said, pouring herself coffee. You made such a huge scene about studying last night, acting like we were running a slave camp. You always act like the victim. Mallory, it is exhausting. She is lying again, she said to Dad, gesturing at me with her mug, making us feel guilty for asking for a little help. My father chuckled. He actually chuckled. She does have a flair for the theatrical, doesn't she? He said. That was the moment the mechanic died. My father, the man who taught me to listen to the engine, had decided that my warning lights were just glitches. From that day on, the phrase, "She is lying again," became my name. It was the caption under every interaction. My back hurts. She is lying again. She just doesn't want to carry the groceries. I can't afford that. She is lying again. She just wants us to pay for it. I didn't say that. She is lying again. She is trying to gaslight us. I moved out a month later, but I never really escaped. The label followed me. It followed me to family dinners where I sat silent and smiling. It followed me to the hospital where I worked, where I would hide my own grimaces of pain because I was terrified that if I complained, someone would look at me with Victoria's eyes and say, "Oh, honey, stop acting." So I learned to be quiet. I learned to swallow the pain. I learned to let my body absorb the insults and the heavy lifting and the falls. I thought silence was safety. But as I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, rubbing the spot on my ribs that felt like it was on fire, I realized that silence was not safety. Silence was just slow destruction. I looked at my phone one last time. The text form. Victoria was still there. "Don't start playing the sick card." I put the car in reverse. The tires crunched over the snow, a sound like bones breaking. "I'm not playing," I whispered to the empty car. I drove home to my empty apartment, where the only thing waiting for me was a bottle of painkillers and a mounting pile of evidence that I was too afraid to look at. But the body keeps the score. My anatomy professor had taught me that. You can lie to your therapist, you can lie to your spouse, you can lie to yourself, but you cannot lie to gravity, and you cannot lie to bone density. My skeleton was a diary, and Victoria Dalton had been writing in it for 10 years. I just didn't know that the final chapter was about to be written, and this time, she wouldn't be the one holding the pen. The routine in the X-ray room was a choreography I could perform in my sleep, and lately, it felt like I was doing exactly that. I adjusted the collimator light over Mrs. Gable's hip, my hands moving with a practiced gentleness that belied the screaming tension in my own shoulders. Mrs. Gable was 82 years old, fragile as a dried leaf, and she winced as I helped her rotate her leg just a fraction of an inch for the lateral view. "I know it hurts," I whispered, placing a foam wedge under her knee to support the joint. "We are almost done. Just one more picture, and then I will get you a warm blanket." She looked up at me, her eyes milky with cataracts but sharp with gratitude. "You have gentle hands, dear," she murmured. "Most of the technicians just yank me around like a sack of potatoes." I smiled behind my mask, but the compliment felt heavy. I knew how to be careful with other people's bodies. I treated every patient who walked through the door of Blue Mesa Community Health Institute as if they were made of glass. I knew the exact angle to position a trauma patient to minimize movement. I knew how to spot a fracture on a scout image before the doctor even walked in the room. But when it came to my own body, I treated it like a rental car I was driving into the ground. I walked back behind the lead-lined glass partition. "Take a deep breath in and hold it," I said into the intercom. As I pressed the exposure button, hearing the familiar mechanical whir and click, I subconsciously held my own breath. A sharp, hot needle of pain threaded its way through the muscles of my right flank. It had been there for 3 days, ever since I helped Victoria move a heavy oak credenza to make room for the dance floor she was renting. I told myself it was just a strained intercostal muscle. I told myself I needed to stretch more. I did not look at the monitor to see my own anatomy. I looked at Mrs. Gable's hip, confirmed the image was clear, and exhaled. My shift ended at 4 in the afternoon. The sun was already dipping low behind the Rockies, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the snow. I did not go home. I had received another text from Victoria reminding me that the centerpiece decorations had arrived and she needed help unboxing them before my father got home. I drove to their house in the foothills. It was a sprawling structure of stone and timber, designed to look rustic but costing more than my entire lifetime of earnings. It was beautiful. It was immaculate, and it always made me feel like an intruder who had forgotten to wipe her feet. When I arrived, Victoria was in the kitchen, directing a catering manager on the phone while simultaneously arranging flowers. She pointed to a stack of heavy metallic planter boxes by the back door without breaking her conversation. She covered the mouthpiece of her phone. "Mallory, those need to go in the garage for now," she whispered, flashing a tight, stressed smile. "They are cluttering up my visual flow. Be a dear." I nodded, not bothering to take off my coat. The planters were faux gold urns, weighted at the bottom to prevent tipping. I lifted the first one. It was awkward and dense, probably weighing 30 pounds. My back spasm flared immediately, a warning shot I ignored. The door to the garage was down a short hallway off the kitchen. It led to a landing with 3 wooden steps down to the concrete floor. I had told my father 6 months ago that the handrail on the left side was loose. I remembered him saying he would fix it, but then Victoria had distracted him with a leaky faucet in the master bath, and the railing had been forgotten. I kicked the door open with my foot, the urn obscuring my vision of the floor. I stepped onto the landing. It happened fast, but in my memory, it plays out in slow, agonizing frames. My right foot found the edge of the first step. It was slick. I did not know why it was slick. Maybe tracked in snow. Maybe a spill that hadn't been cleaned. But my boot lost traction. I pitched forward. Instinctively, I reached out with my left hand to grab the railing, shifting the heavy urn to my right hip. My hand closed around the wood. I gripped it hard, expecting resistance, expecting safety. Instead, the bracket pulled free from the drywall with a sickening crunch of crumbling plaster. The railing swung out into the empty air, offering no support at all. I fell. I twisted in midair to avoid smashing my face against the concrete floor. My torso wrenched violently to the left, and the heavy metal urn slammed into my side, sandwiching my ribcage between the weighted base of the decoration and the hard edge of the wooden stair tread. The sound that left my body was not a scream. It was a wet, choked gasp, as all the air was forcibly ejected from my lungs. I landed in a heap on the cold garage floor, the urn rolling away with a hollow clang. For a moment, there was only white noise. My vision tunneled. The pain in my chest was not an ache. It was a living thing, a jagged creature trying to claw its way out through my skin. I tried to inhale, but my diaphragm seized. I lay there, curled in a fetal position, clutching my side, waiting for the black spots in my eyes to clear. Then I heard the clicking, click-clack, click-clack, click-clack. Victoria appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the warm light of the kitchen. She looked down at me, then at the wall where the railing hung loosely by one screw, and finally at the urn rolling near the tire of my dad's BMW. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she sighed. She stepped down the stairs, avoiding the slick spot I had hit, and walked right past me. She bent down and inspected the urn. She ran her finger over the gold paint, checking for scratches. "Mallory, you have to be more careful," she said, her voice tight with irritation. "These are rentals. If we damage them, we lose the deposit." I finally managed to suck in a shallow breath. It felt like swallowing broken glass. I fell. I wheezed. The railing. It came off. Victoria turned to look at me. She did not offer a hand. She stood over me, her arms crossed, looking impeccable in her cashmere sweater. "The railing was fine yesterday," she said, her tone implying that I had somehow sabotaged the carpentry with my clumsiness. "You probably put all your weight on it instead of using your legs. You are always so heavy-footed." She glanced at the open door to the kitchen. "Get up, Mallory, please. If the caterers see you lying there on the floor like a dramatic teenager, it is going to be so awkward. I do not have time to explain to people why my stepdaughter is throwing a tantrum in the garage." I think I gritted my teeth, trying to push myself up, but a wave of nausea rolled over me. I think I hurt my ribs. It is sharp. Victoria rolled her eyes. I saw it. It was a full, theatrical eye roll. "Here we go," she said. "Just like the time you hurt your ankle before the charity 5K. It is just a bruise. Mallory, you are wearing a thick coat. Get up. You are scaring the dog." Shame is a powerful anesthetic. It does not stop the pain, but it numbs your instinct for self-preservation. Under her withering stare, I forced myself to stand. The world tilted. My side felt like it was on fire. I leaned against the car, clutching my chest. "Maybe I should go to the clinic," I said, my voice trembling. "I can just get a quick chest film, just to be sure." Victoria let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You work in a hospital. Mallory, you of all people should know that ERs are for emergencies, not for people who tripped over their own feet. Do you know how embarrassing that would be? For Grant to hear that his daughter, the medical professional, went running to the doctor for a little bump?" She stepped closer, picking a piece of lint off my shoulder. "You are fine. You are breathing. You are standing. Stop making everything into a tragedy. It is exhausting for everyone." She was right. I thought, I was standing. If it was broken, I wouldn't be standing, right? That is what people say. If you can walk, it is not broken. It was a lie. Medically speaking, people walk on fractures all the time. But in that moment, her certainty overrode my education. I finished moving the boxes. I moved 4 more urns, each step a fresh agony, masking my wince every time Victoria looked my way. By the time I drove home, I was driving with one hand, the other wrapped protectively around my ribcage. That night, lying in my bed, I could not find a position that did not hurt. Lying on my back made it hard to expand my chest. Lying on my side felt like pressing a knife into the bone. I took 3 ibuprofen and propped myself up on a mountain of pillows. "It is just a muscle strain," I whispered to the dark room. "She is right. I am just weak." But as the pain throbbed in time with my heartbeat, my mind began to drift. Unmoored by the medication and the exhaustion, memories surfaced, sharp and disconnected, like slides in a carousel. I was back at the mountain cabin we rented 2 years ago. It was the 4th of July. Dad was down at the lake fishing. Victoria and I were in the kitchen. She asked me to get a bag of ice from the chest freezer in the mudroom. The freezer was old, with a heavy industrial lid that didn't have a hydraulic catch. I had leaned in to grab the ice. "Watch out," Victoria had said, but she hadn't moved to help. The lid had slammed down. It hit my right shoulder with a force that made my teeth snap together. I had cried out, clutching my arm, falling to my knees. Victoria had been there instantly. She slammed the lid shut and latched it. She didn't look at my shoulder. She looked at the door to the deck where the neighbors were grilling. "Shh," she had hissed, smiling and waving through the window. "Keep it down. If you tell anyone, they will think this place is a death trap, and we will lose our security deposit. Do not ruin the trip. Mallory, put some ice on it and put on a long-sleeve shirt." The slide changed. I was in the wine cellar last Thanksgiving. Dad wanted a specific bottle of Cabernet. Victoria sent me down. The cellar was dimly lit. I was carrying a crate of bottles. The rug at the bottom of the stairs, a thick Persian runner, was bunched up. It hadn't been bunched up an hour before. My toe caught the fold. I stumbled, pitching forward. I dropped the crate to catch myself. The bottles shattered. Red wine exploded everywhere like blood. I managed to grab the shelf, wrenching my wrist, stopping my face inches from the jagged glass. Victoria was at the top of the stairs before the echo of the breaking glass had faded. She looked down at the red pool and me, shaking in the middle of it. She gripped my arm as she helped me up, her fingers digging into my bicep hard enough to bruise. "You clumsy girl," she had growled, her voice low and venomous. "That was a $200 bottle. If you had broken your wrist, I would have been stuck cleaning this up alone. I do not have time for you to break things. Mallory." I opened my eyes in my dark apartment, gasping as a spasm seized my chest. The pattern, it was there, floating in the darkness. The garage, the freezer, the cellar. Always just the two of us, always in the blind spots of the house, always places without witnesses, and always. Her reaction was never fear for my safety. It was annoyance at the inconvenience of my potential injury. It was a chilling thought, one I tried to push away. Accidents happen. I was clumsy. That was the narrative. That was the truth. The next morning, I went to work early. The clinic was quiet at 7 in the morning. The radiologists hadn't arrived yet. The lights in the hallways were dimmed. My chest was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that spiked every time I inhaled past a certain point. I walked into exam room 3. I locked the door. I shouldn't do this. It was against protocol to x-ray yourself. It was a fireable offense if I got caught. But I couldn't shake the feeling of the urn slamming into my side. I set the machine. I grabbed a 14x17 cassette. I stood against the bucky, the cold metal pressing against my feverish skin. I positioned myself for an oblique view of the right ribs. I stepped behind the glass. I took a shallow breath, as deep as I dared, and pressed the button. Beep. The image processed on the screen in seconds. The digital grayscale appeared, high contrast, brutal in its clarity. I leaned in, squinting at the monitor. There, on the 7th rib, lateral aspect, there was a disruption in the smooth white arc of the bone, a tiny jagged step-off, a hairline fracture. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Just above it, on the 5th rib, there was a thickened area of bone, a callus, the sign of an old fracture that had healed, and on the clavicle, a faint deformity that looked like a healed crack. I stared at the screen, my hand covering my mouth. I remembered the freezer lid. I remembered the sprain from the fall on the ice 3 years ago that Victoria said didn't need a doctor. My body was a map of every time she had told me I was fine. I reached for the mouse to zoom in, to save the image to a secure folder. I needed to ask Dr. Hayes. I needed to ask someone. But then, Victoria's voice echoed in my head, as clear as if she were standing in the room. She is lying again. Look at her. Creating evidence. Trying to get pity. You are making a mountain out of a molehill. Mallory? Shame washed over me. Hot and suffocating. What if I was wrong? What if that shadow on the 5th rib was just an artifact? What if the line on the 7th was just a vascular groove? If I showed this to Dr. Hayes and I was wrong, I would be the crazy technician imaging herself. I would be the drama queen. I couldn't bear the thought of another person looking at me with that pitying, skeptical expression. I deleted the image. I cleared the screen just as the door handle jiggled. Mallory? It was the morning receptionist. Are you in there? We have a patient waiting. Coming, I called out, my voice steady. I walked out of the room, leaving the truth in the dark, carrying the fracture in my chest like a secret I was forced to keep. Don't make a scene, I told myself. Just get through the shift. But as I walked down the hall, I pressed my hand against my side, and for the first time, I didn't feel weak. I felt angry. The bone was broken. I had seen it. And no matter what Victoria said, a broken bone is not a lie. The conference room was cold, the kind of aggressive, artificial chill that hospitals pump into their basements to keep the staff awake during mandatory seminars. I sat in the back row, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, listening to a social worker from the county click through a PowerPoint presentation titled Recognizing Patterns of Domestic Abuse in Clinical Settings. I had been to 3 of these in the last 5 years. Usually, they were routine. We were trained to look for cigarette burns on children, fingerprint bruises on the upper arms of wives, or the terrified silence of an elder when their caregiver entered the room. I knew the protocol. I knew the code words to whisper to a patient to get them alone. But today, the presenter, a woman with sharp glasses and a voice like sandpaper, clicked to a new slide. The header read, Coercive Control and Medical Gaslighting in Familial Relationships. I took a sip of coffee, my eyes scanning the bullet points. 1. The perpetrator often controls the narrative of the injury. speaking over the patient or correcting their memory of the event. 2. The patient exhibits a history of clumsiness or frequent minor accidents that seem improbable in succession. 3. The patient expresses deep self-doubt, often using the perpetrator's language to describe themselves. I am just dramatic. I have a low pain tolerance. 4. Financial dependency or control disguised as caretaking. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. The coffee cup trembled, sending a tiny ripple across the dark liquid. I read the third point again. I am just dramatic. How many times had I said that? How many times had I apologized to a triage nurse for wasting their time before they even took my blood pressure? I looked around the room. My colleagues were taking notes or checking their pagers. Nobody was looking at me, but I felt as if a spotlight had been turned on, blinding and hot. I had always thought abuse meant shouting. I thought it meant a fist to the face or a locked door. I thought it looked like the bruised women I saw in the emergency room on Saturday nights. I did not know it could look like a stepmother who bought you cashmere sweaters and told you she loved you while convincing the world you were a liar. I slipped out of the meeting 10 minutes early. My chest felt tight, and for once, I knew it was not just the fracture in my 7th rib. It was panic. I was walking fast down the radiology corridor, my head down, counting the tiles to keep my breathing steady, when I nearly collided with a white coat. Whoa, easy there. Pierce, a voice said. I looked up. It was Dr. Jonah Hayes. He was a third-year resident, one of the good ones. He actually learned the technicians' names and didn't treat us like furniture. He looked tired, his hair a little messy, holding a stack of patient charts. Sorry, Dr. Hayes, I mumbled, stepping aside and instinctively wrapping my arm around my right side to protect my ribs. He didn't move. He frowned, his eyes dropping to my arm, then back to my face. You are guarding, he said quietly. What? You are guarding your right side, he repeated. I have seen you do it all week. Every time you lift a cassette or reach for the tube, you flinch, and you are pale. I forced a laugh. It sounded brittle. Oh, it is nothing. Just slept wrong. Pulled a muscle at the gym. Jonah tilted his head. You do not go to the gym. Mallory, you told me last week you hate gyms. My face heated up. I had forgotten I told him that. Well, I tripped. At home, I am just clumsy. You know me. Do I? He looked at me, really looked at me, with a seriousness that made me want to squirm, because the Mallory I work with can thread a catheter into a vein on a moving patient. The Mallory I work with has the steadiest hands in the department, but the Mallory who talks about her home life sounds like a slapstick comedian. He lowered his voice, stepping closer so the passing nurses wouldn't hear. You are a tech. You are surrounded by X-ray machines. Why have you not shot a film? I don't want to bother anyone, I stammered, reciting the script Victoria had written for me. It is not a big deal. I don't want to make a scene. Jonah sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mallory, pain isn't a scene. It is a symptom. If you want, I can pull the order. I will read it myself, off the record if you are worried about the insurance, or on the record if you want it done right. Just let me check. For a second, just a second, I wanted to say yes. I wanted to hand him the burden of my pain and let him carry it. I wanted him to tell me I wasn't crazy. But then I imagined the look on Victoria's face if she found out. I imagined the text messages. She is lying again. She bothering the doctors. She is desperate for male attention. I am fine, Jonah, I said, stepping back. Really, just a bruise. But thank you. I walked away before he could argue, but I could feel his eyes on my back, heavy with concern. That night, my apartment felt different. It was usually my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't have to perform, but now it felt like an evidence locker. I sat on my couch with my laptop, a heating pad strapped to my chest. I opened a browser window and typed in the words from the slide. Medical gaslighting family dynamics. The search results were like reading a biography I hadn't written. Articles about narcissistic parents, about Munchausen by proxy, about the subtle erosion of a victim's reality. I read about Darvo, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She is lying again. That was the attack. That was the reversal. By calling me a liar before I could even speak, she made herself the victim of my deceit. I closed the laptop and reached for my phone. I opened the Notes app and created a new folder. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. Then, I typed the date. November 14th. Fell in garage. Railing broke. Victoria said I was heavy-footed. Pain in right ribs. Sharp on inhalation. No doctor. I scrolled back in my memory. July 4th. Freezer lid. Shoulder impact. Victoria said, "Keep quiet for the deposit. Massive bruise lasted 3 weeks." Thanksgiving. Wine cellar. Rug bunched up. Wrist sprain. Victoria worried about the wine cost. I typed until my thumbs ached. When I was done, I had a list of 12 incidents in the last 4 years. 12, and in every single one, Victoria was the only witness. In every single one. The physical environment, a rug, a railing, a lid, a door, had failed in a way that caused me injury. I sat back, my heart pounding. Was it possible? Was it possible to be that unlucky? Or was the environment being curated for disaster? I needed more. I needed something concrete. Bones heal, bruises fade, but money leaves a trail. I logged into my bank account. I had always been bad with money, or so I was told. Victoria managed the family investments, and I just tried to keep my head above water. But I had access to my own credit card statements going back 7 years. I downloaded them all. I opened Excel. I typed Home Ledger in the first cell. I started searching for keywords. Home Depot, Lowe's, Pottery Barn, Ace Hardware. I found a charge from 6 months ago, $540 to Miller's Carpentry. I frowned. I remembered that charge. Victoria had called me in a panic, saying her card was declined at the contractor's terminal and asking if I could put it on mine for just a day to pay for the repair of the deck lattice. I cross-referenced the date with my notes. That was 2 days after I had tripped on the loose board on the deck. I kept digging. $1,200 to Persian Rug Gallery. Date: 3 days after the wine cellar fall. She had replaced the runner I tripped on, claiming it was cursed, and charged it to me because you were the one who bled on the old one, Mallory. $300 to Rocky Mountain Glass. Date: the day after a heavy mirror fell near me in the hallway, shattering and cutting my calf. I looked at the total column. Over the last 5 years, I had paid nearly $8,000 in home repairs and replacements for the Dalton Pierce estate. Almost every single charge correlated with an accident involving me. I wasn't just the victim, I was the financier. I was paying for the traps she set for me. The realization made me nauseous. I pushed the laptop away and put my head in my hands. It was so elaborate. It was so evil. And yet, if I told anyone, I would sound insane. My stepmother loosens screws and bunches up rugs so I will fall, and then makes me pay for the repairs. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. It sounded like a lie. The next day at the hospital was a blur. I moved through the motions, but my mind was stuck on the spreadsheet. During lunch, I sat in the break room, picking at a salad. 2 older nurses, Sarah and Elena, were sitting at the next table, drinking tea and gossiping about a patient in room 304 who had charmed the entire staff before skipping out on the bill. "It is always the nice ones," Sarah said, shaking her head. "The ones who bring you cookies and remember your kids' names. They are the ones you have to watch. The screamers, you know where you stand with them. But the charmers, they manipulate you with a smile." Elena nodded, stirring her tea. "My grandmother used to say, 'The devil doesn't come in a red cape with horns. He comes as everything you ever wished for.'" She paused, then added, "But you know what? The chart doesn't lie. Labs don't lie. X-rays don't lie. People can act, but pathology cannot. X-rays don't lie." The words hung in the air between the vending machine and the microwave. I stood up. I threw my salad in the trash. I didn't go back to the break room. I went to the PACS workstation in the corner of the tech room. It was a quiet time of day. Most of the doctors were in rounds. I logged in with my credentials. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought it would create an artifact on the screen. I typed in my own name, Pierce Mallory. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew HIPAA regulations were gray when it came to accessing your own records on work time, though technically it was my data. But I didn't care. I needed to see. A list of studies popped up. Most were from years ago. Pre-employment screenings, a dental panorex, but there were 2 from outside clinics that had been imported into the system because our hospital network had merged with the local urgent care centers last year. I had forgotten they were linked. One was from 3 years ago, right ankle series. I clicked it. The image filled the high-resolution monitor. I remembered that day. I had slipped on a patch of ice on Victoria's front walkway. Ice she said she had salted. My ankle had swollen to the size of a grapefruit. The urgent care doctor, a locum tenens who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, had told me it was a bad sprain. Victoria had been in the room, nodding, saying, "She has weak ligaments, always twisting something." I zoomed in on the talus bone. I switched the filter to bone edge. There. It was faint, a ghostly white line cutting across the distal fibula, a non-displaced fracture. It had healed, but the callus formation was jagged, messy. It had healed poorly because I had walked on it for 6 weeks. I had walked on a broken leg because Victoria told me crutches were attention-seeking. I opened the second study, chest PA lat, 2 years ago. Indication, persistent cough, rule out pneumonia. I had been sick for weeks. Victoria said it was allergies. I finally went in when I started coughing up pink sputum. I ignored the lung fields this time. I adjusted the contrast window to look at the skeletal structure. I scanned the ribs. 1, 2, 3. I stopped at the 5th rib on the left side. There was a deformity, a bulge in the smooth arc of the bone, a healed fracture. I closed my eyes, a wave of dizziness washing over me. I didn't remember breaking a rib 2 years ago. I remembered being sore after helping Victoria move a sofa bed. I remembered her telling me I just needed to do more core exercises. I had been walking around with broken bones. I had been living in a body that was constantly screaming, and I had allowed her to put a gag over its mouth. I opened the tool menu on the screen. I selected the annotation marker. With a shaking hand, I moved the mouse. I drew a red circle around the ankle fracture. I drew a red circle around the 5th rib. Then, I remembered the image I had taken yesterday and deleted. The 7th rib. The fresh one. I didn't have that image anymore, but I didn't need it to know the truth. I looked at the screen, really looked at it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at Mallory the drama queen. I wasn't looking at Mallory the liar. I was looking at a crime scene. The bones were the witnesses. The calluses were the testimony. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I knew I couldn't print the films without leaving a log, but I could take a picture of the screen. It wasn't diagnostic quality, but it was proof. I snapped the photo. "She is lying again," Victoria's voice whispered in my head. "No," I whispered back, my finger tracing the white line of the healed break on the monitor. "She is not." I logged off the computer. The screen went black. Reflecting my own face, I looked tired. I looked pale. But for the first time in 10 years, I didn't look confused. I picked up my badge and clipped it back onto my scrubs. I had a ledger full of stolen money and a skeleton full of hidden fractures. The investigation was over. Now, I just had to figure out how to present the case before she broke something I couldn't fix. The Silver Creek Lodge sat perched on the edge of a ridge overlooking the valley, a sprawling architecture of cedar beams and floor-to-ceiling glass that cost $12,000 a month to rent. It was the kind of place that appeared in glossy travel magazines, promising rustic luxury and fire-lit serenity. To my stepmother, Victoria, it was a stage. To me, it was just another crime scene waiting to happen. We arrived 2 days before the rest of the party. Victoria insisted it was because we needed to set the mood before the guests arrived. But the reality was far more transactional. She needed a mover, a cleaner, and a decorator, and I was the only one who worked for free. As I hauled the fourth crate of expensive wine from the trunk of her SUV, the cold mountain air bit at my exposed face. The snow was already a foot deep, a pristine white blanket that muffled the sound of my boots crunching on the driveway. Inside, Victoria was already live-streaming a tour of the great room. "Look at this view. Everyone," she cooed into her phone, panning the camera across the snow-capped peaks. "Grant and I have been working so hard to make this winter getaway a reality. It is so important to have a sanctuary for the family." I paused in the doorway, the crate digging into my hip, our hard work. I knew for a fact that the deposit for this sanctuary had been paid using a loan from my savings account that she swore she had transferred back. When I checked my balance that morning, the money was still missing, but standing there, watching her perform the role of the benevolent matriarch, I said nothing. I just carried the wine to the kitchen, my silence purchased with the hope that if I just did what she asked, maybe this weekend wouldn't hurt. The setup process was grueling. Victoria had a vision for a Nordic winter wonderland theme, which meant dragging boxes of heavy frosted glass ornaments and oversized garlands out of storage. "Mallory, take these down to the basement game room," she ordered, pointing to 3 large plastic bins stacked by the foyer. "We are setting up the secondary bar down there." I looked at the stairs. They were steep, made of polished pine that looked beautiful but offered zero traction. A runner rug snaked down the center, secured by brass rods, but looking at it made my stomach turn. I remembered the wine cellar. I remembered the garage. I lifted the first box. It was heavy, filled with ceramic mugs and metal barware. My ribs, still aching from the garage fall days earlier, throbbed in protest. As I descended the first few steps, I reached for the handrail. It was a thick, rustic log, seemingly sturdy, but when I put my weight on it to ease the pressure on my side, it shifted. It moved about 2 inches to the right, pulling away from the wall anchor with a dull thunk. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, gripping the box tighter. I wiggled the rail again. It was definitely loose. The bracket screwed into the drywall seemed stripped, or perhaps the wood itself was rotting around the screw. I walked back up the stairs, my breath coming short. "Victoria," I called out. She was in the kitchen, arranging pine cones in a bowl. "What is it now?" she asked, not looking up. "The handrail on the basement stairs," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is loose, like really loose. If someone grabs it to catch a fall, it is going to come right off the wall." Victoria sighed, the sound sharp and dismissive. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to the top of the stairs. She reached out, gave the rail a dainty little shake, and shrugged. "It feels fine to me," she said. "You know, Mallory, not everything has to be built like a tank. You are the only one who grabs things with such aggressive force. You are always so heavy-handed." "It moved 2 inches, Victoria," I insisted, "with all the guests coming, and the alcohol. Someone could get hurt. We should call the maintenance guy." She turned on her heel, her face hardening. "We are not calling maintenance. Do you know how much they charge for a call-out up here? Besides, the guests will not be going down there much. Just be careful and stop looking for problems. You are killing the vibe." Killing the vibe. Safety was a mood killer. I spent the rest of the afternoon carrying boxes, walking down the center of the steps, terrified to touch the rail, terrified to trust the rug. Every trip was a calculated risk. By Friday evening, the guests had arrived. There were 10 of them, friends of my father, business associates of Victoria, and a few neighbors from back home. The lodge was filled with the smell of roasting rosemary chicken and expensive cologne. The fireplace roared, casting a warm, flickering glow over the room. I was in the kitchen, plating appetizers, when I heard my name. "Oh, poor Mallory." Victoria's voice floated in from the dining room. "We try not to worry, but honestly, it is exhausting. Do you remember the time she called 911 because she had a panic attack?" Laughter rippled through the room. I froze. She was talking about the time I was 22. when I had an allergic reaction to a medication and my throat started closing up. I had called 911 because I couldn't breathe. To Victoria. It was a panic attack. And then last week, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried perfectly to where I stood. She tripped over her own feet in the garage, literally just tripped on flat ground, and lay there for 10 minutes claiming she broke a rib. I mean, I was standing right there. She barely touched the floor. More laughter. "Oh, stop," a woman's voice said. "That is terrible." "I know." Victoria sighed. "But we love her. We just have to take everything she says with a grain of salt, or the whole salt shaker." I walked out into the dining room with the tray of bruschetta. The laughter died down, replaced by polite smiles. They looked at me differently now. I could see it in their eyes. To them, I wasn't Mallory the hardworking technician. I was Mallory the unstable stepdaughter who needed attention. I set the tray down on the table. My hand was steady, but inside, I was shaking. Mallory. A man named Robert spoke up. He was a lawyer. Sharp-eyed, but kind. "Victoria was just telling us you work at the medical institute. You are an X-ray tech, right?" I nodded. "Yes, I am the lead tech on the night shift." Robert smiled. "That is intense work. Surely with that training, you know when an injury is real and when it is, well, not?" It was a fair question. Based on the lies he had just been fed, he was giving me a chance to defend my competence. Before I could answer, Victoria laughed. She reached out and patted my shoulder, her fingers digging in slightly. "Oh, Robert," she said, flashing a dazzling smile. "Mallory is wonderful, but let us be honest, she has always had a better imagination than a medical mind. She sees things that are not there. It is part of her charm." The insult was breathtaking. It stripped me of my professional identity in one sentence. She had just told a room full of successful people that I was incompetent at my own job. Usually, this was the part where I would smile awkwardly, make a self-deprecating joke, and retreat to the kitchen. That was the script. Smile. Mallory. Don't make a scene. Mallory. But tonight, the ghost of the X-ray image I had seen on the monitor, the jagged white line on my 7th rib, flashed in my mind. I did not smile. I did not laugh. I looked directly at Victoria. I kept my face completely blank. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. The air in the room grew uncomfortable. The crackling of the fire seemed suddenly very loud. Victoria's smile faltered. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion and irritation crossing her face. She wasn't used to resistance. She wasn't used to me refusing to play the game. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "who wants wine?" She turned away, but I saw the look she shot me. It was a promise. I had embarrassed her by not participating in my own humiliation. There would be a price for that. The next morning, the world was white. A blizzard had rolled in overnight, dumping another 6 inches of snow on the mountain. The wind howled around the eaves of the lodge, rattling the heavy glass panes. The guests were sleeping in. My father was snoring in the master suite. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Victoria appeared. She was already dressed in a pristine white cable-knit sweater and designer jeans, her hair perfectly curled. She didn't say good morning. "The decorations in the basement are not right," she said, pouring herself a cup of black coffee. "The theme is off. We need that big crate of vintage lanterns I left in the mudroom. I want them lined up on the mantel downstairs before everyone wakes up." I looked at the mudroom. The crate she was pointing to was made of wood and filled with iron lanterns. It must have weighed 40 pounds. "Victoria," I said, putting down my mug, "I can't carry that down those stairs. My back is really hurting today, and that railing is still loose." She slammed her mug down on the counter. Coffee splashed over the rim. "Oh, for God's sake, Mallory," she hissed. "Are we really doing this again? The silent treatment at dinner wasn't enough? Now you are going to refuse to help?" "I am not refusing," I said quietly. "I am telling you I am injured. Can we just wait for Dad to wake up? He can help me." "Your father is exhausted," she snapped. "He finally has a chance to sleep in. And you want to wake him up because you are too lazy to carry a box? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet level. If you do not take that box down right now, I am going to go upstairs and tell everyone that you are refusing to help. I will tell them you are sulking because of the joke last night. I will tell them you are ruining the trip. Do you want to be the villain of the weekend, Mallory? Or do you want to be useful? The coercion was familiar. It was the trap she always set. Do the dangerous thing, or be the bad daughter. Risk your body, or risk your relationship with your father. I looked at the box. I looked at the stairs. Fine, I whispered. I will do it. Good, she said, her face instantly relaxing into a smile. I knew you were a team player. I walked to the mudroom. I lifted the crate. A sharp, hot pain shot through my right side, making me gasp. I gritted my teeth and walked to the top of the basement stairs. The stairwell was dimmer than the rest of the house. The bulb at the bottom was flickering. I took the first step. Victoria stood at the top of the landing. She wasn't leaving. She leaned against the doorframe, holding her phone to her ear, pretending to leave a voicemail for the caterer. Hi. Yes, just checking on the appetizers, she said into the phone. But her eyes were locked on me. She was watching. She was the predator waiting for the prey to cross the river. I took the second step. I hugged the wall, avoiding the loose railing on the left. The crate was heavy, pulling my center of gravity forward. Be careful, she said, interrupting her fake call. Do not scratch the paint. I took the third step. My boot hit the runner rug. It happened in a heartbeat. The rug, which should have been secured by the brass rods, slid. It just slid forward on the polished wood as if the rod wasn't even there. My feet went out from under me. Instinct took over. I dropped the crate to try and catch myself. The heavy wooden box tumbled forward, crashing down the stairs with a deafening noise. My body pitched backward. My left hand shot out and grabbed the railing, the only thing between me and a tumble down 12 hard steps. For a split second, I had it. I gripped the wood. I thought I was safe. Then, the wall bracket gave way. It didn't just loosen. It ripped out of the wall completely. The railing swung wild and useless into the air. I fell. I fell hard. My lower back slammed against the edge of the fourth step. My head snapped back, hitting the wall. I slid down 3 more steps, a tangle of limbs and pain, before coming to a halt halfway down the flight. The impact knocked the wind out of me. The world went gray. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. But through the ringing, I heard a sound that made me nauseous, a dry, sickening crack from deep inside my chest. I lay there, draped over the stairs, gasping for air that wouldn't come. My vision swam. The pain was absolute. It was a white-hot star exploding in my ribcage. I looked up. Victoria was still standing at the top of the stairs. She hadn't moved. She hadn't reached out. She hadn't dropped her phone. For one long, terrifying second, our eyes met. There was no fear in her face, no panic, no concern. There was only a cold, clinical observation. She looked like a scientist watching a rat complete a maze. She looked satisfied. Then, the mask slammed back into place. She threw her hands up in the air, not to help me, but to perform. "Oh my God!" she yelled, her voice echoing through the quiet house. She turned her head toward the hallway where the bedrooms were. "Grant! Robert! Come quickly!" I tried to speak. I tried to say I can't breathe. I tried to say the rug moved. But Victoria spoke first. She looked down at me, her lip curling in disgust. Her voice loud enough to wake the dead but devoid of any actual urgency. She threw herself down the stairs, she shouted, framing the narrative before I could even draw a breath. Then she leaned over the banister, looking straight at me, and delivered the line that would seal my fate and, eventually, her own. "Everyone, wake up. She is lying again." She didn't call 911. She didn't run down to check my pulse. She just stood there, guarding the top of the stairs, making sure that when the witnesses arrived, they would see a performance, not a victim. I closed my eyes as darkness threatened to pull me under. Crack, my mind repeated. Crack. The bone had spoken, and this time, as I lay broken on the stairs of her winter palace, I knew that no amount of gaslighting could fix what had just snapped. I just hoped I would survive long enough to prove it. The floor of the basement was freezing against my cheek, but the cold was nothing compared to the fire raging inside my chest. Every time I tried to pull in a breath, it felt like a serrated knife was twisting between my 6th and 7th ribs. My vision was gray at the edges, tunneling down to the pair of designer boots standing just inches from my face. Voices were swarming above me, a chaotic cacophony of confusion and irritation. "She is fine." Victoria's voice cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. "Back up. Everyone, give her air. She just had the wind knocked out of her. It is a panic response. Look, she's hyperventilating." I was not hyperventilating. I was suffocating. My lungs were trying to expand, but the cage of bone that was supposed to protect them had collapsed inward. I made a sound, a wet, gurgling wheeze, that I had heard a dozen times in trauma bays, but never from my own throat. "That does not sound like panic. Victoria?" The voice was deep, gruff, and trembling with actual fear. It was Uncle Mike, my father's old college roommate. He was a contractor, a man who had built houses with his bare hands, and he knew what structural failure sounded like. I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder, not gripping me to bruise, but steadying me. "Mallory?" Mike's face swam into view. He looked terrified. "Kid, look at me. Can you talk?" I shook my head. A spasm seized my right side, and I curled tighter, a whimper escaping my lips. "She is pale as a sheet." "Grant," Mike yelled, looking up at my father who was hovering uselessly in the background, looking from me to Victoria like a man trying to decide which reality to believe. "Look at her lips. They are turning blue. This is not a tantrum." "Oh, Mike, please." Victoria sighed, kneeling down but not touching me. She smoothed her own sweater. "You know how she gets. If we call an ambulance, it will be a whole scene. The sirens, the neighbors looking. It is just dramatic. We can drive her to urgent care in an hour if she does not calm down." "In an hour?" Mike roared. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "I am calling 911, right now." "Do not be ridiculous," Victoria snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "Think about the cost. Think about the party." "I do not give a damn about the party." Mike was already dialing, his thick fingers mashing the screen. "Hello? Yeah, I need an ambulance at the Silver Creek Lodge. We have a fall victim. Possible internal injuries. Breathing is shallow. Yeah, hurry." Victoria stood up, her jaw tight. She looked at my father. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "I hope you are happy. Grant, Mike just ruined the weekend." The next 20 minutes were a blur of agony and noise. I remember the sound of the sirens cutting through the mountain wind. I remember the paramedics, 2 men in heavy coats, bursting through the front door, bringing the smell of diesel and cold air with them. They strapped me onto a backboard. The movement made me scream, a raw, jagged sound that silenced the room. "Easy, easy," one of the paramedics said. "We have got you." Victoria insisted on riding in the ambulance. "I am her mother," she lied, climbing into the back before my father could even offer. "I need to be there to give her history." The doors slammed shut, sealing us in the cramped, sterile box. The siren wailed as we began the descent down the icy mountain roads. I lay strapped down, staring at the ceiling of the ambulance, counting the rivets to keep from passing out. The paramedic, a young guy named Steve, was trying to take my vitals. "So, what happened?" Steve asked, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around my arm. Before I could wheeze out an answer, Victoria spoke. She was sitting on the bench seat, looking composed, holding my purse like a prop. "She slipped on a rug," Victoria said, her voice pitched perfectly to sound like a concerned but exhausted parent. "Just a little slip, but Mallory has a very low pain tolerance. She tends to spiral. We have been through this before with phantom injuries." Steve paused, looking at the monitor. "Her heart rate is 120, he noted. She has anxiety, Victoria said quickly. She gets worked up. Last year she called 911 for a panic attack. Her doctor says she somatizes her stress. You know how it is. She wants to feel taken care of. I tried to speak. I wanted to scream. She is lying. I wanted to say, check my ribs. But every bump in the road sent a shockwave of pain through my torso that left me breathless. I could see the change in Steve's eyes. He relaxed. The urgency drained out of his movements. He stopped looking at me as a trauma patient and started looking at me as a waste of resources. Okay, honey, Steve said, patting my leg with a condescending gentleness. Just try to calm down. We will get you checked out. But you have to stop hyperventilating. You are making it worse. Tears of frustration leaked out of the corners of my eyes and ran into my ears. She was doing it again, even here, in a moving vehicle surrounded by medical equipment. She was rewriting reality. When the ambulance pulled into the bay, my stomach dropped. I saw the blue sign through the back window. Blue Mesa Community Health Institute. My workplace. Of course, it was the only Level 2 trauma center in the county. The doors swung open. The cold air hit me again. As they wheeled me out, the familiar sounds of the loading dock washed over me, the hiss of hydraulics, the rattle of the gurney wheels. We burst through the automatic doors into the triage area. Incoming, Steve shouted. 32-year-old female, fall from standing height, vitals stable but tachycardia at 120, history of anxiety and somatic symptoms. He was repeating her words. He was quoting the lie. I saw faces I knew. There was Sarah, the charge nurse, standing at the desk. There was Kevin, the transporter who I joked with every morning about the coffee. They stopped what they were doing. Their jaws dropped. Mallory? Sarah rushed forward, her clipboard clutched to her chest. Oh my God, is that Mallory? Victoria stepped in front of the gurney, effectively blocking Sarah's view of me. She is okay, Victoria announced to the room, waving her hand dismissively. Just a little tumble at the vacation rental. She is making a bit of a fuss, but we wanted to be safe. Sorry to bring her to her own office, but you know how she is. Sarah looked confused. A fuss? She looks gray, ma'am. She is embarrassed, Victoria said with a tight smile. She knows she made a scene. Just put her in a bay and give her something to calm her nerves. Valium usually works. I squeezed my eyes shut. The humiliation was worse than the pain. My colleagues, the people who respected me, who trusted me to image their patients, were watching my stepmother paint me as a hysterical child. They wheeled me into Trauma Bay 2. The nurses moved me onto the hospital bed. The movement was excruciating. I let out a sharp cry. Shh, Mallory, Victoria chided. Standing by the head of the bed. Stop it. You are scaring your friends. Get a line in, a nurse said. Let's get her hooked up. Suddenly, the curtain was ripped back. What do we have? The voice was sharp, professional, and familiar. Dr. Jonah Hayes walked in. He was wearing his navy blue scrubs, a stethoscope around his neck, and a look of focused intensity. He stopped dead when he saw me. Mallory? His eyes went wide. He looked from my pale, sweaty face to Victoria, who was checking her reflection in the turned-off monitor screen. Dr. Hayes, Victoria beamed, recognizing him from the time he had stitched up my father's hand. So glad it is you. Maybe you can talk some sense into her. She is convinced she is dying because she slipped on a carpet. Jonah didn't look at her. He walked straight to the side of the bed. He took my hand, not to hold it, but to check my pulse manually. His fingers were warm and firm. Mallory, he said, his voice low and serious. Look at me. Can you breathe? Hurts, I gasped. Can't. Deep. Breath. Where? I pointed a shaking finger to my right side, just under the armpit. Jonah gently placed his stethoscope on my chest. Deep breath for me. I tried. I really tried. But the moment my ribcage expanded, the agony spiked to a level 10. I choked and stopped. Jonah pulled the stethoscope ears out. His face was grim. Decreased breath sounds on the right, he said to the nurse, and I am feeling crepitus. That is not a bruise. Victoria stepped forward, putting a hand on Jonah's arm. Doctor, really, do not let her work you up. Her previous doctor said her x-rays were always clean. She does this. Jonah turned to her. He moved his arm so her hand fell away. He didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He just looked at her with a coldness I had never seen in him before. Ma'am, he said, who are you? I am her mother, Victoria said, lifting her chin. Stepmother. I wheezed from the bed. Jonah nodded once. Right. Mrs. Dalton, here is the situation. Your daughter has diminished lung sounds and palpable instability in her thoracic cage. She is a trauma patient, and per hospital policy for trauma assessments, I need the room clear of all non-medical personnel. I am not leaving, Victoria scoffed. She needs me. She lies to doctors. Jonah stepped closer to her. He was tall, and he used every inch of his height. And I listen to bodies, not relatives, he said. You are impeding my assessment. You can wait in the lobby, or I can have security escort you. Your choice. The room went silent. The nurses stopped moving. Even the monitor seemed to beep quieter. No one ever spoke to Victoria Dalton like that. Victoria's face turned a blotchy red. She opened her mouth to argue, looked at the security guard standing by the door, and snapped it shut. Fine, she hissed. If you want to indulge her delusions, go ahead. But do not expect me to pay for the CT scan. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, the curtain rustling violently in her wake. The moment she was gone, the air in the room seemed to change. The pressure lifted. Jonah turned back to me. His expression softened, the anger replaced by a fierce concern. Okay, he said gently. She is gone. It is just us, just the team. He looked at the nurse. I want a portable chest x-ray, stat, and get a dedicated rib series, right side, and get respiratory down here. He leaned down close to my ear as the nurse started an IV in my arm. Mallory, he whispered. I heard what the paramedic said she told them. I do not care. I know you. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. I think it is broken, I stammered. I think it has been broken before. Jonah squeezed my shoulder. We are going to find out. I am going to read these films myself. I am going to look at every millimeter of bone. And this time, we are going to document everything. I promise you, no one is going to talk over the evidence today. Dr. Hayes. The radiology tech arrived with the portable machine. It was Ben, a guy I had trained. He looked horrified to see me on the table. Hey, Mal, Ben said, his voice shaking. Let's get a picture, okay? Go ahead. Ben, Jonah said, stepping back behind the lead curtain but keeping his eyes on me. While Ben positioned the board behind my back, a process that made me bite my lip until it bled, I heard a voice drifting in from the hallway. The door to the trauma bay had not fully latched. It was Victoria. She was on the phone. I know. It is ridiculous. Her voice echoed, shrill and angry. Grant is useless. He is just sitting there. The little brat ruined the whole weekend. We had the mayor coming for dinner tonight. And now I am stuck in this filthy waiting room while she plays the victim for a cute doctor. There was a pause. Oh, she is faking, Victoria continued. I saw her fall. She practically threw herself down the stairs just to spite me because I asked her to move a box. She is mentally unstable, just like her mother was. Inside the room, Sarah, the charge nurse, froze. She was holding a bag of saline. She looked at the door, then at me. Her eyes narrowed. Did she just say you threw yourself? Sarah whispered. I nodded, closing my eyes. Sarah didn't say anything. She just walked over to the computer terminal in the corner of the room and started typing. I knew what she was typing. She was adding a nursing note. Quoted family member in hallway stating patient intentionally caused injury. Discrepancy noted between observed clinical distress and family account. She was building the record. Clear, Ben shouted. Breathe in if you can, he instructed. Hold it. I sucked in a breath. The pain blinded me. It felt like the bone was grinding against itself. Beep. Relax, Ben said. Got it. Jonah walked back to the monitor on the portable machine immediately. He didn't wait for it to be sent to the PACS system. He leaned in, squinting at the small digital display. I watched his face. I watched the way his eyebrows pulled together. I watched his jaw set. He looked up at me. He didn't smile. There was no relief in his eyes, only a dark, grim validation. "Ben," Jonah said, his voice hard, "take her to CT, now. We need a 3D recon, and call the orthopedic surgeon on call." "Is it bad?" I whispered. Jonah walked over and brushed a strand of hair off my sweaty forehead. "It is real. Mallory," he said, "it is all real, and we are going to prove it." As they unlocked the wheels of the stretcher to move me to the CT suite, I felt a strange sensation. The pain was still there, screaming and relentless, but the suffocating weight of the gaslighting, the 10 years of being told I was crazy, weak, and lying, began to lift. I was wheeled out of the trauma bay, past the waiting room where Victoria was still pacing and complaining on her phone. She didn't see me pass. She was too busy spinning her web. But she didn't know that the web had just snapped. I lay alone in the cold, metallic donut of the CT scanner. A few minutes later, the machine whirred to life, spinning around me, slicing my body into thousands of digital cross-sections. Voice of the machine. Breathe in. Hold your breath. I held it. I let the machine see me. I let it see the fresh break that was jagged and angry. I let it see the old, healed fractures that were the scars of her previous accidents. I let it see the truth that had been buried under layers of cashmere and lies. Breathe out. I exhaled. Go ahead and talk, Victoria. I thought as the table slid me out of the gantry. Tell them I am lying. Tell them I am dramatic. Because in about 5 minutes, Dr. Jonah Hayes was going to walk into that waiting room with a grayscale image that spoke a language she could not manipulate. My bones were about to give their testimony, and they had a hell of a lot to say. The reading room at the Blue Mesa Community Health Institute was known among the staff as the Fishbowl. It was a windowless, climate-controlled sanctuary, kept at a shivering 65 degrees, illuminated only by the ambient blue glow of high-resolution diagnostic monitors. I had spent thousands of hours in that room, standing quietly in the corner while radiologists dictated their findings into microphones, my eyes tracing the grayscale topography of other people's tragedies. I knew the hum of the cooling fans. I knew the smell of the ozone and stale coffee. But today, I was not the technician standing in the shadows. I was the ghost in the machine. I lay on a gurney in the small observation bay just outside the glass door of the reading room. The curtain was drawn back slightly, just enough for me to see Dr. Jonah Hayes sitting at the main workstation. He was not alone. He had paged Dr. Evelyn March, the department chair, and a woman whose eyes were rumored to be sharp enough to spot a hairline fracture from across a parking lot. The room was quiet, but it was a heavy, charged silence. It was the silence of a courtroom before the verdict is read. I watched Jonah load my images. The new CT scan data and the fresh chest x-rays populated the bank of 4 monitors. My body, usually a source of shame and confusion, was suddenly dissected into crisp, digital slices. The images were beautiful in a terrifying way. The ribs curled around the black void of my lungs like a delicate cage. The spine stacked up like a tower of pearl-white coins. Jonah leaned in, his face bathed in the harsh white light of the screen. He clicked the mouse, adjusting the contrast window, pulling the grayscale tighter to highlight the bone density. There, I saw him mouth the word. He pointed to the right side of the thoracic cage. Even from where I lay, I could see it on the main monitor. The 7th rib was not a smooth arc. It was interrupted, a sharp, jagged disruption in the cortex of the bone. It was a fresh, acute fracture, clean and undeniable. Dr. March leaned in closer, adjusting her glasses. She did not look at the fresh break. Her eyes were scanning the rest of the ribcage, her head moving slowly from left to right. She pointed to a spot higher up, on the 5th rib. Then she pointed to the clavicle. then to a faint irregularity on the scapula. I could not hear their words through the glass, but I knew the language of their bodies. I knew what a radiologist looked like when they found something that did not match the clinical history. It was a specific stillness, a pause in the rhythm of the work. Jonah minimized the current study and opened the hospital archives. My heart hammered against my bruised chest. He was pulling the old files. The files Victoria had told me were clean. The files my previous doctors had dismissed as normal. He pulled up a film from 3 years ago. The car accident, where Victoria said I had barely been tapped. He pulled up the film from 2 years ago. The porch fall. He placed them side by side with the current image. Inside the reading room, the atmosphere shifted from clinical curiosity to cold anger. Jonah was reading the radiologist's report from 3 years ago. I saw him shake his head. He typed something into the search bar, likely pulling up the notes from the primary care physician, Dr. Henderson, the man Victoria always insisted we see. Dr. Marge crossed her arms. She said something to Jonah, her expression stern. Jonah gestured at the screen, animated, frustrated. He pointed at the date of the old scan, then at the healed callus on the 5th rib. I closed my eyes, the pain in my side throbbing in time with the realization that was washing over me. They were seeing it. Finally, they were seeing the timeline written in calcium. A few minutes later, the heavy door of the reading room opened. Jonah stepped out, followed by Dr. March. They didn't look like doctors anymore. They looked like detectives who had just found the murder weapon. Jonah walked over to my gurney. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were blazing. "We reviewed everything, Mallory," he said, his voice low and steady. "Dr. March agrees with my assessment." Dr. March nodded at me. She was a woman of few words, but she reached out and rested her hand on the railing of my bed. "You have a displaced fracture of the 7th rib. Mallory, it is consistent with a high-velocity impact or a fall against a hard object, but that is not all." She paused, looking at Jonah, then back to me. "You have a healed fracture on the 5th rib, likely 2 to 3 years old. You have a malunion, a break that healed crookedly, on your right clavicle, and there is evidence of multiple microfractures in your right hand that suggest repetitive trauma." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It came out as a sob. "She told me." I choked out. "She told me the x-rays were clear. She said the doctor told her I was fine." Jonah's jaw tightened. He held up a folder. I read the notes. Mal. The radiology reports from those years actually noted suspicious lucency and recommended follow-up imaging. They weren't clear, but the follow-up was never ordered. He opened the folder and read from a printed sheet, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Listen to this note from Dr. Henderson, dated 3 years ago. Patient presents with rib pain. Mother states, patient has high anxiety and history of exaggerating symptoms for secondary gain. Physical exam limited due to patient guarding. Plan, ibuprofen and reassurance. No further imaging authorized by guardian due to cost concerns." "Guardian?" I whispered. "I was 29. She signed as your emergency contact and medical proxy because you were on her insurance plan at the time," Jonah explained. "She controlled the narrative. Mallory, she told them you were crazy, so they looked at your films with their eyes closed. They saw what she told them to see. It is medical gaslighting by proxy," Dr. March said, her tone clinical but cutting. "And it is a failure of this institution. We missed it." Jonah closed the folder. "We are not missing it today." He turned to the nurse station. "Page the on-call social worker. Get Sarah Higgins down here. Tell her we have a case of suspected non-accidental trauma involving an adult dependent. And tell her to bring the intake forms for a protective order." Non-accidental trauma. The words hung in the air. They didn't use the word abuse yet, but the implication was heavier than the lead apron I wore every day. "Wait," I said, panic flaring in my chest. "If you call social services, Victoria will... She will destroy me. She will tell everyone I made this up." Jonah looked at me. "Let her try." he said. He walked back into the reading room. I heard the mechanical whir-chug-whir of the laser printer starting up. It was a sound I heard 50 times a day, the sound of a digital truth being burned onto a physical sheet of film. Usually, it was just routine, a broken wrist, a pneumonia check. Today, it sounded like a gavel banging on a judge's bench. Whir-chug, whir-chug. Jonah emerged a moment later holding a large, translucent envelope. He held it carefully, as if it contained something holy. "Mallory," he said, "I'm going to call them in. Your father, Victoria, all of them." "Into the room?" I asked. "Into the family consult room," he said. "It is private, it is secure, and it has a light box. She is going to talk over you. I warned him. She always does." Jonah looked at the envelope in his hand, then at Dr. March, and finally at me. "If she says you are lying," he said, his voice filled with a dark, quiet promise, "then we will let the film answer her." He signaled to the orderly, "Wheel her into consult room B. I will go get the family." The consult room was a small, windowless space, usually reserved for telling families that their loved one had cancer or hadn't survived a car crash. It had a round table, 4 uncomfortable chairs, and a wall-mounted light box for viewing films. The orderly parked my wheelchair in the corner. Sarah Higgins, the social worker, was already there. She was a woman with kind eyes and a notebook that looked like a weapon. She nodded at me but didn't speak. She just sat in the corner, pen poised. The door opened. Grant walked in first. My father looked smaller than I remembered. His shoulders were slumped, his face gray with fatigue and confusion. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Mal?" he asked quietly. "Are you okay?" Victoria said you... "Grant, sit down," Victoria interrupted, sweeping into the room behind him. She brought the cold with her. She was still wearing her pristine white sweater, though now she looked annoyed, like a CEO whose meeting had run over time. She glanced at me, then at the social worker, and finally at Jonah. "Well," she said, remaining standing, "can we wrap this up? We have guests waiting at the lodge. I assume you gave her a sedative and we can take her home?" Jonah did not answer her. He walked to the door and closed it. The latch clicked with a finality that made the room feel suddenly very small. He walked to the front of the room, standing next to the blank white face of the light box. He placed the large envelope on the table. "Mrs. Dalton," Jonah said, his voice devoid of the politeness he usually reserved for families. "Mr. Pierce, please take a seat." "I prefer to stand," Victoria said, crossing her arms, "and I really do not appreciate this dramatic flair. Mallory has clearly worked you all up into a frenzy over a bruised rib." "It is not a bruise," Jonah said. "Oh, please." Victoria rolled her eyes. "She is lying again. She does this for attention. Last time she said she broke her ankle and it was just a sprain. She has a low pain threshold. We know this." Jonah didn't look at her. He reached into the envelope. The sound of the film sliding out against the plastic was the only sound in the room. Shh. He took the large black and gray sheet of film. He snapped it under the clips of the light box. Click. He reached out and flipped the switch. The light flared to life. The image of my broken chest filled the room, glowing with an intense, unforgiving brightness. The jagged fracture on the 7th rib was so clear, so sharp, that it looked violent even in static gray. Victoria blinked. She took a half step back, her eyes flicking to the screen. "This," Jonah said, pointing to the break, "is a displaced fracture of the 7th rib. It takes significant force to break a bone like this. This does not happen from slipping on a rug, unless that rug was placed at the edge of a cliff." "Well," Victoria stammered, her voice losing a fraction of its power, She fell hard. I told you she is clumsy." Jonah reached into the envelope again. "And this," he said, snapping a second film onto the box next to the first one, "is from 3 years ago." He pointed to the ghost of the break on my ankle. "And this," a third film went up, "is the healed fracture on her 5th rib." He stepped back, letting the wall of evidence shine down on them. 3 fractures, Jonah said, his voice rising just enough to fill the corners of the room. 3 different years, 3 different accidents, and in every single case, the medical record shows that the family refused further imaging. He turned to face Victoria directly. You said she was lying, Jonah said. You told the paramedics she was lying. You told her father she was lying. He tapped the glass of the light box, right over the fracture. The bone is not lying. Mrs. Dalton, the bone is screaming. My father made a sound, a choked, strangled gasp. He was staring at the light box, at the map of pain inside his daughter's body, his eyes wide with horror. Victoria stood frozen, the light from the X-rays reflected in her eyes, turning them into cold, white pools. For the first time in my life, I saw her mouth open, and no words came out. The trial had begun, and the star witness was glowing on the wall. The fluorescent light from the viewing box hummed with a low, electric buzz that seemed to vibrate against the walls of the small consultation room. It was the only sound in the world. Outside this room, the hospital was churning with the chaos of a Saturday night shift. But inside, time had stopped. The air was thick, sucked dry of oxygen, leaving only the sterile scent of ozone and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. Doctor, Jonah Hayes stood by the wall, his hand resting on the switch of the light box. He did not look at me. He did not look at my father, Grant, who was sitting in the corner with his head in his hands. He did not look at the social worker, Sarah, who sat like a statue with her pen poised over her notebook. He looked only at Victoria, and Victoria looked at the wall. The images on the screen were stark. Against the glowing white background, the bones of my chest stood out in high contrast black and gray. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like a Rorschach test, a meaningless jumble of shadows and light. But to everyone in this room, the story was terrifyingly clear. Victoria broke the silence first. Of course she did. Silence was a vacuum, and she had always needed to fill it with her own version of reality before anyone else could speak. Doctor, honestly, she said, her voice pitching up into that breathless, condescending laugh she used when she wanted to make someone feel small. We are wasting so much time. Mallory makes things up. She has done it since she was a teenager. She wakes up in the morning and decides something hurts just to get out of chores. You can look at those pictures all day. But I am telling you, if you tell her to stop making a scene, the pain will magically disappear. She turned to my father, reaching out to pat his knee. Grant, tell him. Tell him how she limped for a week after that tiny fender bender 3 years ago until we told her we were not buying her a new car. My father looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked at me, then at the X-ray. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to agree with her, perhaps to recite the script she had written for him over the last decade. But Jonah cut him off. He did not shout. He did not argue. He simply picked up a red grease pencil from the tray and tapped the plastic surface of the film. The sound was sharp, like a judge's gavel. Mrs. Dalton, Jonah said, his voice devoid of emotion. I am not interested in anecdotes. I am interested in anatomy. He circled a jagged, dark line that tore through the white arc of my 7th rib. This, he said, tracing the fracture, is a fresh, acute break. It is displaced, meaning the bone ends have shifted out of alignment. This requires significant force. This is consistent with a hard fall against a blunt object, like a stair tread or a wall. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. She threw herself down the stairs. She said quickly, I saw her. She tripped on nothing. Jonah ignored her. He reached into the envelope and pulled out another sheet of film. He snapped it onto the box next to the first one. And this, he said, is from 2 years ago. He circled a thickened white knot on the 5th rib. This is a callus, he explained, looking directly at my father. When a bone breaks and is not set properly, the body throws down extra calcium to bridge the gap. It leaves a scar. This rib was broken. Mr. Pierce, 2 years ago. He put up a third film. And this is 3 years ago, the ankle, a non-displaced fracture of the distal fibula. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway outside. My father was staring at the wall, his face pale. "Broken?" my father whispered, but we took her to urgent care. "Victoria, you said the doctor said it was a sprain." Victoria shifted her weight. Her cashmere sweater suddenly looked like armor that was too tight. She fixed a smile on her face, but it did not reach her eyes. "It was a sprain, Grant," she insisted. "Doctors get things wrong all the time. Or maybe the film was blurry. You know how Mallory is. She probably moved. She probably flinched just to make it look bad." "The bone does not flinch, Mrs. Dalton," Jonah said, "and neither does the paperwork." He walked over to the table and picked up a stack of papers. He held them differently than he held the x-rays. He held them like an indictment. "I pulled the records from the urgent care clinic," Jonah said. "Since our systems merged last year, I have access to the full history." He began to read. Date: October 14th, 3 years ago. Patient presents with severe ankle pain after fall on ice. Physician recommends casting and crutches. Disposition: guardian refused treatment. Note states: mother insists patient is malingering. Patient discharged against medical advice with ace bandage. He flipped the page. Date: July 5th, 2 years ago. Patient presents with shoulder pain and bruising. Physician suspects rotator cuff tear and requests MRI. Disposition: guardian refused imaging. Note states: stepmother states injury was minor and patient has low pain tolerance. Declined further workup due to cost. Jonah looked up, his eyes locked onto Victoria. "Every single time," he said, his voice rising slightly, "every time she was hurt, there was a medical recommendation for help, and every single time, there is a signature refusing it." He dropped the paper on the table in front of my father. "Is that your signature, Miss Pierce?" My father looked down at the paper. His hand shook as he reached for his reading glasses. He stared at the scrawl at the bottom of the refusal form. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "No, that is not my signature." He looked up at Victoria, confusion warring with horror in his eyes. "Victoria? It says Grant Pierce, but that is your handwriting." Victoria stiffened. She smoothed her hair, a nervous tic I had seen 1,000 times. "Well, of course it is," she snapped, her tone shifting from dismissive to defensive. "You were at work, Grant. You were in meetings. You are always so busy providing for us. I did not want to bother you with Mallory's little dramas. Do you know how much an MRI costs? $2,000. For a bruised shoulder? I was protecting our finances. I was protecting you." "You signed my name," my father said, the realization dawning on him like a slow sunrise. "You signed my name to stop her from seeing a doctor?" "I signed it to stop her from manipulating us," Victoria shouted, her composure finally cracking. Look at her sitting there, acting like a victim. She loves this. She loves that we are fighting about her. She is lying again. Grant, can't you see it? She dragged us to this hospital, ruined our anniversary weekend, just to get attention from this resident." She pointed a manicured finger at Jonah. "She's lying again," she repeated, the mantra that had defined my life. Suddenly, a quiet voice cut through the shouting. "Mrs. Dalton." It was Sarah, the social worker. She had not moved, but her presence suddenly filled the room. She looked up from her notebook. "In all 3 of these incidents, the ankle, the shoulder, and now the ribs, were you the only witness?" The question hung in the air. It was simple. It was deadly. Victoria blinked. Well, we spend a lot of time together. I manage the house." "So that is a yes?" Sarah asked calmly. "You were the only person present when she fell on the ice? You were the only person present when the freezer lid hit her? And you were the only person present today when she fell down the stairs?" "It is a coincidence," Victoria said, her eyes darting around the room. "She is clumsy around me because she gets nervous. She knows I have high standards." "And the rug?" I spoke up. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was raspy, weak, but it was steady. I pushed myself up in the wheelchair, fighting the stabbing pain in my side. "The rug on the stairs today," I said, looking directly at her. "It moved. Victoria, it slid right off the step. The brass rods were loose, just like the railing was loose." Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, here we go. Now it is a conspiracy. I suppose I loosened the screws myself? I suppose I greased the floor?" "Did you?" The question came from my father. He was standing up now. He was looking at the spreadsheet I had printed out, the one Jonah had placed next to the medical records, the home ledger. "I see the charges here," my father said, holding up the paper. "Miller's Carpentry, Rocky Mountain Glass, Persian Rug Gallery, all charged to Mallory's card." He looked at Victoria. "You told me you paid for the rug repair. You told me you paid for the railing in the garage. You told me Mallory was broke because she was irresponsible." "She is," Victoria cried. I was teaching her responsibility. She broke it. She bought it. That is how the real world works." "Grant." "She didn't break the railing." "Victoria!" my father yelled, his face flushing red. "The railing broke her." He turned to the light box. He stared at the jagged line of my broken rib. He reached out, his finger hovering inches from the image, as if afraid to touch the evidence of his own negligence. "I believed you," he whispered to Victoria. But he was looking at me. 10 years. I believed you every time you said she was lying. I thought I was being a good father by being tough. I thought I was helping her grow up. He turned to me. Tears were streaming down his face. "Mal," he choked out. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know it was broken." "You didn't know because you didn't look," Jonah said. His voice was hard, unforgiving. "You didn't look because it was easier to listen to the story than to check the facts." Jonah stepped between my father and Victoria. He looked like a wall. "Mrs. Dalton," Jonah said, "you said she is lying. You said her body is fine." He gestured to the wall of glowing bones. "This is a radiograph. It is a projection of density and matter. It cannot be forged. It cannot be gaslit. It cannot be manipulated. If anyone in this room is telling a story that does not match reality, it is not the patient." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Mallory is a technician. She spends her life making the invisible visible, and today, her body is doing the same thing. If you are saying she is lying, then you are arguing with physics, and physics always wins." Victoria looked at the X-ray. She looked at the jagged white line that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that her narrative had failed. For a moment, I saw the panic behind her eyes, the realization that the weapon she had used against me, my own body, had turned against her. She grabbed her purse. She pulled her coat tight around her. "This is ridiculous," she spat. "I am leaving. Grant, are you coming? We have guests." My father did not move. He stood next to my wheelchair. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His hand was shaking, but it was heavy and warm. "No," my father said. "I am not going anywhere." Victoria froze at the door. She looked back. Her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Fine," she said. "Stay with the cripple. See who pays the mortgage next month without my family's trust fund." She slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. But I didn't flinch. I sat there, in the silence that followed, staring at the light box. The pain in my chest was still a roaring fire, but for the first time in 10 years, the cold knot of shame in my stomach was gone. I looked at the fracture. It was ugly. It was jagged. It was painful. But it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was the truth. I looked up at Jonah. He was watching me, his expression soft. He reached out and turned off the light box. Click. The room went dim, but I didn't feel like I was in the dark anymore. "She is gone, Mal," Jonah said quietly. I took a breath. It hurt, but I took another one. "I know," I whispered, "and this time, she can't take the evidence with her." My father knelt beside my chair. He buried his face in his hands and began to weep. The the sound of a man whose entire world had just shattered. I reached out and touched his hair, a gesture of forgiveness he didn't deserve yet, but one I needed to give. I was broken, I was bruised, I was in debt. But I was not a liar, and for tonight, that was enough. The door rattled in its frame from the force of Victoria's exit, but the silence she left behind lasted less than 3 seconds. Sarah Higgins, the social worker who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up with a speed that belied her calm demeanor. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the hallway. "Mrs. Dalton?" Sarah's voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of state authority. "If you leave the hospital premises right now, I will have to contact the sheriff's department to issue a detainment order for a mandatory investigation. Please come back inside." I watched the crack in the door. I held my breath, the pain in my ribs pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. For a moment, I thought she would keep walking. I thought she would get in her luxury SUV and drive back to the mountain lodge, leaving us all in the wake of her denial. But then, the door pushed open. Victoria walked back in. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. She did not look at me. She looked at Sarah with a mixture of hatred and calculation. She sat down in the chair furthest from the light box, smoothing her coat around her like a shield. "This is harassment," Victoria said, her voice tight. "I hope you know that. My lawyers will be contacting the hospital administration in the morning." Sarah ignored the threat. She sat back down at the table and opened her laptop. The screen cast a blue glow on her face, mirroring the eerie light of my broken bones on the wall. "Mrs. Dalton," Sarah began, her tone dangerously polite. "I want to ask you a direct question. Have you ever, at any point in the last 10 years, prevented Mallory from seeking medical attention or intervened to keep diagnostic testing to a minimum for the sake of financial cost or family reputation?" Victoria scoffed. "Of course not. That is absurd. We have excellent insurance. Why would I care about the cost? I just didn't want her to be subjected to unnecessary radiation for phantom pains." Sarah turned the laptop around so the screen faced the room. "I have access to the payer records from your insurance provider," Sarah said. "Blue Cross maintains detailed logs of pre-authorization calls." She pointed to a list of dates. "Here," Sarah said, tapping the screen. 3 years ago, the date of the ankle injury. There is a log of a call from your number to Dr. Henderson's office. The notes from the receptionist state, "Stepmother called to cancel follow-up ortho appointment. Stated patient is just anxious and does not need a cast. Requested a phone consult instead to save the copay." She scrolled down. "Here, 2 years ago, the shoulder injury, another call. Guardian declined MRI authorization. Stated patient has a history of histrionics, and the family prefers a conservative approach with rest and ice." Sarah looked up. "There are 12 calls in this log over 5 years. Mrs. Dalton, in every single one, you are the one speaking. You are the one canceling appointments. You are the one defining the symptoms as anxiety or drama. Mallory is not even on the line." My father stood up. He walked over to the laptop and stared at the screen. His hands were shaking so hard, he had to grip the edge of the table. "You told me the doctor said she didn't need the MRI." My father whispered, "I remember that night. We were in the kitchen. You told me Dr. Henderson said it was a waste of money." Victoria didn't look at him. She picked at a piece of lint on her sleeve. "He did say that." She lied, her voice wavering slightly. "Or maybe I misunderstood. It was a chaotic time. Grant, you were traveling. I was managing everything alone." "Stop," my father said. It was a word I had never heard him say to her. Just stop. The door to the consult room opened again. A nurse stood there. It was Brenda, the charge nurse from the night shift, a woman who had worked at Blue Mesa for 20 years. She had been listening from the nurse's station, and now she stepped inside, her face grim. "I remember you," Brenda said, looking directly at Victoria. Victoria frowned. "Excuse me?" "4 years ago," Brenda said, stepping further into the room. "I was working triage. You brought her in." She pointed at me. She had a head laceration. You said she walked into a cabinet door. I touched the faint scar on my hairline. I remembered that night. Victoria had been moving a heavy mirror and lost her grip. It had swung into me. I wanted to keep her for observation. Brenda continued. Protocol for a concussion. You threw a fit. You told the attending physician that she needed to sleep in her own bed, that hospitals made her manic. You literally signed the AMA form, against medical advice, and dragged her out to the parking lot while she was still dizzy. Brenda crossed her arms. I thought it was weird back then, but she was 28, so I couldn't call Child Protective Services. I just thought you were a controlling mother. I didn't realize you were covering your tracks. The room fell silent. The weight of the evidence was piling up, layer by layer, the insurance logs, the medical notes, the witness testimony. Sarah Higgins cleared her throat. She looked at Victoria with eyes that were completely devoid of sympathy. Mrs. Dalton, Sarah said, in the state of Colorado, medical professionals are mandatory reporters for any suspected abuse of a child, an elder, or a dependent adult. But we also have laws regarding intimate partner and family violence. When Sarah said the words, family violence, Victoria flinched as if she had been slapped. Her face lost the last of its color, turning a sickly shade of gray. This is not violence, Victoria hissed. She fell. She is clumsy. You are twisting everything. Grant looked at me. He looked at the X-ray on the wall, the jagged white line of the rib fracture. He looked at the healed break on the 5th rib. He looked at the laptop screen full of canceled appointments. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was replaying 10 years of conversations. He was remembering every time Victoria had rolled her eyes at my pain. He was remembering every time she had told him I was exaggerating to get out of work. She wasn't avoiding chores, my father said, his voice breaking. She was hurt. She was actually hurt. He looked at Victoria with a look of absolute betrayal. You made me hate my own daughter, he whispered. You told me she was lazy. You told me she was a liar. And I believed you. I let you treat her like an employee in her own home because I thought you were trying to teach her character. I was, Victoria cried out, desperation creeping into her voice. Grant, look at her. She is a mess. She has no money. She has no husband. She is 32 and living in a rented apartment. I was trying to toughen her up. By breaking her bones? Jonah asked. Jonah stepped forward. He was holding a tablet now. He tapped the screen and turned it toward Victoria. I found something else, Jonah said. An internal scheduling note from our radiology department. 6 months ago. He read from the screen. Patient. Mallory Pierce. Reason. Chronic lumbar pain. Appointment booked by patient. Status. Cancelled. He looked at me. You booked an MRI for your back 6 months ago. Mal, why did you cancel it? I swallowed hard. The lump in my throat felt like a stone. I couldn't afford the copay. Read the cancellation note. Mallory, Jonah said gently. I looked at the screen. The clerk had typed, patient called to cancel. Stated that family does not agree the condition is serious enough to warrant imaging. Patient was crying. Jonah looked at Victoria. Who told her it wasn't serious? Mrs. Dalton? Who told a woman who stands on her feet for 12 hours a day that her back pain was just drama? It was Victoria, I whispered. The truth came out of me like a purge. I called her to ask if I could borrow the copay money from the account I share with Dad. She told me I was pathetic. She told me I was just trying to get drugs. She told me if I went to the doctor, she would tell Dad I was an addict. Grant made a sound like a wounded animal. He turned away from Victoria, putting his hand over his mouth. Sarah Higgins wasn't done. She had been typing on her laptop while we spoke. There is one more thing, Sarah said, and this is the part that makes this a pattern, not a misunderstanding. She turned the laptop again. I ran a background check on your name, Mrs. Dalton, not just here, but in your previous county of residence, before you married Mr. Pierce. Victoria froze. Her eyes went wide. I found a record from a clinic in Greeley. Sarah said, 12 years ago. You were listed as the emergency contact for a Mr. David Salyer. Your boyfriend at the time? Victoria didn't answer. She was breathing shallow, fast breaths. Mr. Salyer was treated 4 times in 6 months. Sarah read, a broken wrist, a concussion, a dislocated shoulder. The notes are almost identical to Mallory's. Patient states he is clumsy. Partner claims patient exaggerates pain. Refused follow-up imaging. Sarah looked up. He stopped coming to the clinic because you two moved away. But the pattern is the same. You find someone vulnerable. You isolate them. And then, accidents start happening around you. Accidents that you control. Accidents that you treat with contempt instead of care. The room was dead silent. This was the twist that shattered the last remnant of Victoria's mask. It wasn't just me. It wasn't that I was a bad stepdaughter. It was her. It was a pathology. She needed to break things so she could be the one to decide if they got fixed. Victoria stood up. Her chair fell backward with a loud clatter. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed. Her voice was shrill, unrecognizable. The polished, charity gala socialite was gone. In her place was a terrified, cornered animal. "You are all crazy," she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at us. "You are plotting against me. It was an accident. She tripped. People trip. This isn't a TV movie. Stop trying to make me into a villain. I have raised millions for charity. I am a pillar of this community." She was unraveling. The more she shouted, the more Sarah Higgins typed. Every scream, every denial, every deflection was being recorded in the official log of the investigation. "Grant!" Victoria turned to my father, grabbing his arm. Tell them to stop. We are leaving." My father pulled his arm away. He looked at her with eyes that were cold and dead. "Don't touch me," he said. He looked at Jonah, then at Sarah. "I want everyone to leave the room," Grant said, his voice low. "I need to speak to my wife alone." Jonah stepped in front of my wheelchair. He didn't move. "No," Jonah said. My father looked surprised. "Excuse me?" "No," Jonah repeated. "I am not leaving Mallory alone with her, and I am not leaving you alone with her to be manipulated again. This is now a hospital investigation. Mrs. Higgins stays. I stay. We are witnesses." It was a small moment, but it was monumental. For 10 years, Victoria had controlled every room she walked into. She had controlled who spoke to whom. She had controlled the narrative. Now, a 28-year-old resident was telling her she had no power here. The balance had shifted. The gravity in the room had moved from her to the illuminated film on the wall. Victoria looked around. She saw Sarah typing. She saw Brenda guarding the door. She saw Jonah standing like a shield in front of me. And she saw Grant, her husband of 10 years, looking at her like she was a stranger. She turned back to the light box. She stared at the fracture. For 10 years, her words had been the law. She's lying again. It was a spell she cast that made my pain disappear in the eyes of the world. But now, she looked at the white, jagged line of the broken bone. She realized that the bone didn't care about her charity galas. The bone didn't care about her reputation. The bone didn't care about her gaslighting. The bone was a fact. And for the first time, she realized that her favorite sentence, "She's lying again," was useless against the cold, hard truth of calcium and physics. She slumped against the wall, her fight draining out of her. She looked small. She looked ordinary. "It was just a rug," she whispered, but nobody was listening anymore. Jonah reached out and handed me a tissue. I hadn't realized I was crying. "It is over, Mal," he said softly. "The mask is gone." I looked at her one last time. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, exhausting relief. The doctor had read the X-ray out loud, and the silence that followed was the first honest thing my family had experienced in a decade. 3 days after the incident in the consultation room, I walked into the county courthouse. I was not there to press criminal charges. Though the district attorney was still reviewing the case for potential fraud, I was there for something more immediate and, to me, more important. I was there to file for a permanent protective order. Sarah Higgins, the social worker who had become my fiercest advocate, had explained it clearly. This was not just about physical safety, it was about administrative severance. As long as Victoria Dalton remained my emergency contact, my financial proxy, or had any access to my medical records, I was vulnerable. She had weaponized the bureaucracy of my life against me, and I needed a judge to cut the wires. The hearing was in a small courtroom, a room that smelled of floor wax and old paper. It lacked the drama of a television procedural. There was no jury, just a tired-looking judge named Honorable Thomas Vance sitting behind a high wooden bench. I sat at the plaintiff's table with a court-appointed attorney, a young woman named Ms. Lopez, who had read my file with a look of increasing horror. On the other side sat Victoria. She was dressed in a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, respectable chignon. She looked perfect. She looked like the grieving, misunderstood mother. Next to her sat a high-priced lawyer who kept checking his watch. My father, Grant, sat in the gallery. He looked 10 years older than he had last week. He was not sitting behind Victoria. He was sitting behind me. Ms. Lopez stood up. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear, we are asking for a permanent order of protection for Ms. Mallory Pierce against Mrs. Victoria Dalton. We are basing this petition on a documented history of medical interference, financial coercion, and physical negligence that amounts to domestic abuse. Victoria's lawyer stood up immediately. Objection. These are allegations based on a single accidental fall. Mrs. Dalton is a pillar of this community. She has raised Ms. Pierce since she was a teenager. We have evidence to the contrary, Ms. Lopez said. She placed a file on the judge's bench. It contained the insurance logs of the canceled MRIs. It contained the home ledger, showing the thousands of dollars I had paid for repairs after my so-called accidents. And then, the door to the courtroom opened. Dr. Evelyn March walked in. Victoria stiffened. She turned around, her composure cracking for the first time. She had expected Jonah, perhaps. She had not expected the chief of radiology from the most respected hospital in the county. Doctor, March took the stand. She did not need notes. She spoke with the absolute authority of 30 years in medicine. Dr. March, the judge asked, looking over his glasses, can you explain your findings regarding the petitioner's injuries? Yes, Your Honor. Doctor, March said, I reviewed the full radiographic history of Ms. Pierce. We found a pattern of fractures, specifically on the fifth rib, the right clavicle, and the distal fibula, that were at various stages of healing. These injuries occurred over a period of 5 years. She paused, looking directly at Victoria. The nature of these fractures is inconsistent with the clumsiness or minor trips described in the medical notes provided by the stepmother. These are deceleration injuries, blunt force trauma, and the fact that they were allowed to heal without proper setting or support indicates a deliberate withholding of medical care. Victoria's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him down. Mrs. Dalton, the judge said, turning his gaze to her, do you have anything to say? Victoria stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She smiled that practiced, charming smile that had fooled donors and neighbors for a decade. Your Honor, she said, her voice trembling with faux emotion. This is a tragedy. Mallory has always been difficult. She has a history of fabrication. She tells stories to get attention. She is lying again. Your Honor, she wants to destroy our family because she is jealous of the stability I provide. I love her, but she is a pathological liar. It was the performance of a lifetime. If I had been 18, I would have crumpled. I would have believed her. But I was 32, and I had a picture of my own skeleton in my bag. The judge looked at Victoria. He looked at her for a long time. Then, he picked up the glossy printout of my X-ray that Ms. Lopez had submitted. He stared at the jagged white line of the seventh rib. Mrs. Dalton, the judge said, his voice dry and unimpressed. I have been sitting on this bench for 20 years. I have heard a lot of people lie. I have heard defendants lie. I have heard plaintiffs lie. I have heard lawyers lie. He held up the photo. But bones do not know how to lie. Mrs. Dalton. The sentence hung in the air like a guillotine blade. This X-ray shows a broken body, the judge continued, and these insurance records show a deliberate attempt to hide it. That is not love. That is control. Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The narrative she had controlled for so long had finally run into a wall she could not talk her way over. The judge turned to my father. Mr. Pierce, the judge asked, you are the father. Do you have a statement? My father stood up. His hands were shaking. He looked at Victoria. Then he looked at the back of my head. I do, he said, his voice cracking. I want to state for the record that I was wrong. I believed my wife because it was easier than believing my daughter was in pain. I let her sign my name. I let her dismiss the doctors. He took a breath, a sob catching in his throat. I never listened to Mallory's story. I only listened to Victoria's version of it, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. The gavel banged. Order granted. The judge ruled. Mrs. Dalton is hereby enjoined from contacting Ms. Pierce at her home or place of employment. She is removed from all medical and financial proxy status immediately. Furthermore, Mrs. Dalton is prohibited from using Ms. Pierce's name or likeness in any fundraising, social media, or public speaking engagements. Victoria gasped. That last part was the nail in the coffin. She could not use me as her prop anymore. She could not be the saintly mother of a troubled child. She looked at me with pure hatred, but I did not look away. I held her gaze until she was the one who flinched. The fallout was swift. The court order was a public record. Within 48 hours, the board of directors for the regional charity Victoria chaired received a summary of the hearing. They did not like the words medical withholding and financial coercion associated with their president. I heard from a neighbor that a moving van was parked in the driveway of the big house 2 days later. Victoria was taking a sabbatical to stay with her sister in Arizona. The perfect wife and community leader had been exposed as a fraud, not with a bang, but with the quiet, undeniable click of a shutter. A week later, on a Tuesday evening, I hosted a dinner party. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom unit near the hospital, but it was warm. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for it. I made a simple beef stew and bought a loaf of crusty bread. The guest list was small. Dr. Jonah Hayes sat on my sofa, arguing playfully about baseball with Mrs. Gable. My elderly neighbor who had lent me her car when mine broke down last year. Sarah Higgins was there, looking relaxed without her formidable notebook, and Brenda, the triage nurse who had remembered the concussion incident, was pouring sparkling cider into mismatched glasses. There was no tension. No one was judging the dust on the baseboards. No one was waiting for me to trip so they could laugh. On the bookshelf, right next to my old textbooks, I had placed a framed object. It was not a picture of friends or a landscape. It was a high-quality print of my chest X-ray. Jonah noticed it first. He walked over, a smile playing on his lips. "Nice art," he said, "very avant-garde." I walked over to stand beside him. I looked at the jagged line on the 7th rib. It was already starting to heal. A soft callus was forming, knitting the bone back together, straight this time. "It is not art," I said. "It is a receipt." I turned to the room. "Can I make a toast?" Everyone raised their glasses. "To the radiologist," I said, looking at Jonah, "for reading the film, not the file." "To the bone," Jonah corrected, clinking his glass against mine, "for telling the truth when nobody else would." We ate, we laughed, and for the first time in 10 years, when I laughed, I didn't hold my side. I didn't brace for pain. I just let the sound fill the room, unchecked and real. 3 weeks later, I walked out of the hospital after the day shift. The snow had finally stopped falling. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue, the kind of Colorado winter day that hurts your eyes with its brightness. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The contact name just said Dad. I hesitated. We hadn't spoken much since the court hearing. He had sent texts, apologies, offers to pay off my credit card, but I hadn't been ready to talk. I answered, "Hello?" "Hi, Mal." His voice sounded tentative, humble. I am sitting at the coffee shop near your apartment, the one with the blue awning." I looked across the street. I could see the awning. "I know I have no right to ask," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But do you have time? I want to hear it, all of it, every time you fell, every time you hurt. I want to know what really happened in the garage, and the cellar, and the cabin." He paused. "I want to hear your story, Mal, from you." I looked at the hospital behind me. I looked at my hands. Strong, capable hands that had spent a decade positioning others so they could be seen. "Okay, Dad," I said. "I will be there in 5 minutes." "Thank you," he whispered. "But Dad," I said, gripping the phone tight, "we are not starting with the stories. We are starting with the X-ray. I brought a copy, because I need you to see it before you hear it." "I understand," he said. "I am ready to look." "Good," I said. I hung up the phone. I took a deep breath of the crisp, cold air. My ribs gave a twinge of ache, a reminder, a phantom echo, but it was fading. The bone was knitting. The structure was holding. I stepped off the curb and walked across the street. Not as a liar, not as a victim, but as the narrator of my own life, and this time, no one was going to interrupt me. Thank you for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with our community. Please subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.